Hello and welcome to Chinese Novel Audio Wave. Explore our playlist for more captivating novels, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 81, Achilles' Heel. After Wu Chen sent a text message to Su Qingying was very panicked. Su Qingying's secret was that she was a masochist, but the problem did not lie in being a masochist itself. Su Qingying had not done anything outrageous. She endured, she dared not, she still maintained her own glory, so the problem itself was not because of what she liked. Rather, Wu Chen can prove that she was. The post Su Qingying posted on the forum 2 years ago was fatal to her. If it wasn't for the post that couldn't be deleted, Su Qingying really had nothing to be afraid of. If he couldn't prove it, it would be smearing. And Su Qingying's reputation was so good that it was difficult to be smeared easily. No one would believe it. But once it could be proven and everyone believed it, then. Speaking of it, Wu Chen found out about Su Qingying's hidden attributes by chance. He had investigated the Su family in detail in the previous year's reincarnation, focusing on Su Qingying. As a result, he found that Su Qingying was almost perfect from the inside out. A person who was already perfect was almost out of this world. She was impeccable. Wu Chen almost believed it. Then, on a certain July 7th, when Wu Chen was investigating Su Qingying again, he stole Su Qingying's personal computer, and he found a very deeply hidden mysterious folder in Su Qingying's computer. A locked folder that could not be opened without a password. Wu Chen didn't have a password. He used hacking techniques to forcibly crack the folder, and saw the contents inside. It was some small movies. For adults in their 20s, that's fine. It felt unnecessary to hide it. But Su Qingying's small movie was a specific type. This was very wrong. After Wu Chen realized that there was a problem, he found some browsing records and automatically saved account passwords in the browser of Su Qingying's personal computer. So, he knew when Su Qingying was when is the bright moon. And he also knew the post that Su Qingying posted on the forum back then. He knew everything. On July 7th, the last day of Wu Chen's life, that was, 4 days ago, at the bar at night, Wu Chen once talked about Su Qingying with Mu Qianchen. Because of the Jinfu jewelry robbery, Mu Qianchen didn't believe Wu Chen's reincarnation sleeping with women, so he showed Wu Chen the news and asked Wu Chen if he had slept with Su Qingying. Wu Chen admitted that he had slept with her. Mu Qianchen didn't believe it. Wu Chen said that Su Qingying had a fatal weakness that allowed him to easily take her down. Mu Qianchen still didn't believe him and asked what the weakness was. Wu Chen didn't say anything, just let Mu Qianchen guess. Su Qingying was a masochist, and that post on the forum was Su Qingying's Achilles' heel. The post allowed Wu Chen to get in touch with Su Qingying in private. Because of her special situation, it's really not that difficult to attack her. As long as you know her well enough, you didn't even need to make too complicated a layout, you could take her down in one day. Aren't you sick? Don't you look at the place? This is on the side of the main road. Although there are few cars, if a passing car sees you and me in the car, where will our shame be? Can you grow up? Use your brain. Wu Chen scolded Su Qingying, who was in the co-pilot seat, holding his arm. Su Qingying didn't say a word. Her expression was a little aggrieved, but her eyes were not wronged at all. Although there was a bit of pitiful expression, it was more of that special look. Don't you have any brain? Wu Chen reprimanded her again, raising his hand and pretending to hit her. Su Qingying suddenly looked frightened and whispered with a hum, I was wrong. She had been hiding and controlling. She dared not resist her mother, and she would never dare to cross the threshold. But today, Wu Chen discovered her hidden attributes. Wu Chen gave her the courage to take this step. This was not a bad thing for her, at least Wu Chen thought so. Su Qingying's problems accumulated over time. If she didn't do reasonable counseling and release, then in the future, she would definitely suffer from depression, and even commit suicide by jumping off a building. Come here, sit upright. Wu Chen ordered Su Qingying to sit upright again. Su Qingying immediately moved, and looked at Wu Chen eagerly. Seat belt. Wu Chen scolded again. Su Qingying put on her seatbelt. Wu Chen yelled at her. Su Qingying hoped to be ordered like this. Of course the order was one that made her feel comfortable. Masochists couldn't accept everything. For example, the various restrictions and arrangements made by Su Qingying's mother made her very uncomfortable. Let's move, Wu Chen said and started the Lamborghini again. They hit the road. Where are we going? Su Qingying glanced and asked in a low voice. Her tone was very soft and gentle. She was in a state right now. Where do you want to go? Wu Chen asked. Go wherever you want, Su Qingying whispered, and glanced at Wu Chen with a different emotion. Then let's go to my house, Wu Chen said. Okay, Su Qingying nodded. Wu Chen stepped on the accelerator, and the speed of the car soared. They went home. Su Qingying's ID on the forum is, when is the bright moon? In fact, Su Qingying didn't pick up this screen name casually. She expressed her thoughts very cryptically through this screen name. When would the bright moon be there? It's a poem by Su Shi, Water Tune. Su Qingying's surname was Su, and her first name was Qingying, and there was such a sentence in Su Shi's poem, Dance to find out how Qingying is in the world. It had to be said that a well-educated person even had such an excellent and connotative screen name. So Wu Chen didn't plan to wait now. He was going to take Su Qingying home, and then. Half an hour later, the blue Lamborghini already returned to the main city, and it should have arrived home, but it didn't. Wu Chen didn't return to Donghai Wafu in the North City, because the apartment had been transferred to him and registered under his name. He wanted to go back to his old house, which was under the name of his parents. The Su family was looking for him and will investigate him. The house under his name was not safe, and someone might suddenly come looking for him. So back to the old house. In this way, it is estimated that no one would disturb him all day today. Chapter 82. Come, say something. In the old street of Dongcheng district, the blue Lamborghini had been parked on the side of the alley for several hours, and no one knew who it was, because Wu Chen was very careful when he brought Su Qingying back. In fact, he was not afraid of being seen by acquaintances in the neighborhood, but Su Qingying was. Su Qingying, as the successor of the Jinfu Group and the #1 beauty in the East China Sea, was really well known in the East China Sea, and she had frequently been in the news these days. Because of the big robbery on July 7, the frequency of her recent appearances to the public very high. She could not be seen. So Wu Chen simply bought 2 masks, so as not to be seen by others. It was already past 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Wu Chen brought Su Qingying back after 10 o'clock, and a full 4 hours passed. 5th floor, Wu Chen's house, in the bedroom. Wu Chen was using a small shovel to shovel the wax on the small cabinet. The candle was bought by him when he bought the mask. It's on the table. He cleared the table. He picked up the rope on the ground, rolled it up, stuffed it into the lower drawer of the small cabinet, and the fly swatter, these were originally at home. Although Wu Chen couldn't move here anymore, he just took them away. For some clothes and toiletries, Donghai Wafu could be checked in with bags, so Wu Chen didn't need to bring other things there. Wu Chen cleaned the fly swatter when he first came back, so it was clean. Wu Chen was busy with his own work, but behind him, Su Qingying was wrapped in a quilt and fell asleep. Su Qingying had the habit of taking a nap, which was good for her skin, but of course her sleeping now had nothing to do with taking a nap, she was just too tired. She slept soundly, with a faint smile on her lips. Ding-a-ling, Wu Chen's cell phone rang. He turned his head and picked it up for a look, then picked it up and said, "Did they find your place?" "Brother-in-law, brother-in-law, you know." It was Li Ruotai. Wu Chen responded nasally. After returning, taking advantage of a break, Wu Chen asked Su Qingying who else knew the information after she checked on him. Su Qingying said that she destroyed the information after checking it. She was really careful, since she was afraid of her parents knowing she went to investigate a young man by herself. It didn't matter who she was investigating, the problem was that the subject of the investigation was a young male, so she had already been careful to this extent. And the reason why she was able to investigate Wu Chen's information smoothly was because Wu Chen had sent her a text message first, and she had Wu Chen's real name verified mobile phone number. But her mother didn't. Although her mother could also find out Wu Chen's phone number, since she could find out by checking Su Qingying's call records, but she might not go in this direction first. The first direction of investigation should be Wu Chen's blue Lamborghini. The license plate number directly checked the owner. But Lamborghini was not under Wu Chen's name, but Wang Zhuangyuan's name, and the ownership had not been transferred. Wu Chen was just driving the car. Wu Chen didn't care about violations of regulations. Wang Zhuangyuan would deal with it. So obviously, Su Qingying's mother would find Wang Zhuangyuan first. But it was obviously impossible for Wang Zhuangyuan to disclose Wu Chen's information easily. Wu Chen knew these people too well. He could even deduce their reactions step by step. The #1 scholar called me first, saying that Mrs. Su was looking for him and asked who was driving the car. He would not dare talk about you, brother-in-law, so he pushed it to me, and then Mrs. Su also called me. I'm on the phone with her, Li Ruotai said briefly. Wang Zhuangyuan was still very good at handling things. He confessed to Li Ruotai first. What did you say? Wu Chen asked casually, turning his head at the same time. He heard movement behind him. It was Su Qingying who was woken up. Su Qingying, who was wrapped in a quilt, looked at Wu Chen with blinking eyes, the eyes of a young woman immersed in love. Of course the two of them were not in love. This kind of look was just the same as the eyes of a young woman in love. Because she was a masochist, after she was done in by Wu Chen, the feeling Wu Chen gave her and the position in her heart were completely different. Wu Chen raised his hand and rubbed Su Qingying's hair. Su Qingying crawled towards Wu Chen, tilted her head and rubbed against the back of Wu Chen's hand. No sound. Of course she knew that Wu Chen was on the phone. Just say that you are my brother-in-law, that me and your elder sister are about to get married. Li Ruotai asked again, brother-in-law, what's going on? The Su family has been checking on you for the past 2 days. Did my sister tell you yesterday? Madame Su just called. Listening to her tone, she was very angry. I asked her if it was you brother-in-law that dared to offend her. I dare to say, she does not allow her daughter to have any stains, so now she is only looking for Wu Chen and will not mention Su Qingying. I also said, if there is anything she can talk to me about. She didn't say anything, and said that it has nothing to do with the Li family. However, it has something to do with you, brother-in-law. Li Ruotai finally said, and then I hung up. Well, okay, I got it. Wu Chen said, brother-in-law, what is it? Brother-in-law, you don't need to hide from me. I will take care of you if there is something I can do. We are all a family, so you don't have to be polite to me, Li Ruotai said again. It's okay. It's just a small problem, Wu Chen said with a smile. Do you think something will happen to me? I know that you are amazing, but this time, it's quite strange. Okay, don't meddle, I'll deal with it. I'll hang up first. Then, okay. Wu Chen hung up the phone. Everything was as he expected. Ding thump, ding thump. Just as Wu Chen put down his phone, he heard 2 beeps in succession. He picked it up again and saw that he had received 2 reminder text messages. When he was talking to Li Ruotai just now, someone called him and it couldn't get through, so a text message came to remind him. It's Li Ruobing. It was estimated that Li Ruotai called Li Ruobing first after talking with Mrs. Su. Wu Chen didn't think Mrs. Su would call Li Ruobing directly. After she knew that the man who took her daughter was Li Ruobing's boyfriend, not only would she not call to question her, she might even have doubts and doubt her own judgment. Li Ruobing's boyfriend dared to abduct other women. It's not good to ask directly. Mrs. Su was worried about causing trouble. Most importantly, Li Ruobing's character might not be used to her. If she dared to say something bad, Li Ruobing would kill her. Mrs. Su's status in Donghai was extremely high. After all, she was the wife of the richest man in Donghai, and when she married Su Ruiwen, although Su Ruiwen was rich, he was not as rich as he was now. That was to say, most of Su Ruiwen's richest man's assets were the joint property of husband and wife. What's more, Su Ruiwen respected and loved his wife very much. Mrs. Su was an intellectual and helped Su Ruiwen's career a lot these years. Mrs. Su could call Li Ruotai directly to ask about the situation, but not to get angry with Li Ruotai. She was not that brainless, and even if she has a verbal dispute with Li Ruotai, she could make peace afterwards. It's different with Li Ruobing. If she had a conflict with Li Ruotai, she might not really offend Li Ruotai, they could reconcile, but if she went to trouble Li Ruobing, she would really directly offend Li Ruotai. Dingling. Wu Chen hadn't finished reading the text message when the phone rang. It was Li Ruobing who called for the third time and got through this time. Wu Chen picked it up. "A Tai called me," Wu Chen said first. "What's the matter with you?" Li Ruobing asked. Her tone was only puzzled. "What kind of relationship do you have with the Su family? From Tai's point of view, I feel that you should have offended the Su family. They were quietly investigating you yesterday. I called Tai directly to ask. You want to know?" Wu Chen said with a smile. "You can tell me if you want." Li Ruobing replied. She knew that Wu Chen would never say anything that Wu Chen didn't want to say. Just wait a moment," Wu Chen said, turned to look at Su Qingying, handed over the phone and said, "Come on, say something." Chapter 83, Friends. Su Qingying froze for a moment. Wu Chen asked her to say something. Although she heard that Wu Chen answered 2 calls, she didn't know what the person on the phone said, and what Wu Chen said didn't reveal any key information. The word, "A Tai," couldn't let her know the specifics. Who is it? So she didn't know and couldn't guess who was on the other end of the phone. In fact, she didn't listen to it at all just now. Wu Chen said it in detail when he called, but after listening to it, she turned her head and forgot. It had nothing to do with her, and she just wanted to enjoy today. Not only Su Qingying was stunned, but even Li Ruobing on the other end of the phone was also stunned. "Come on, say something," she heard it. "Is there some beside Wu Chen?" "It's okay, talk." Seeing Su Qingying looking at him, Wu Chen smiled at Su Qingying without worry. "What will I say?" Su Qingying asked in a low voice. Li Ruobing heard it. It was a woman's voice. "Whatever you want to say, don't worry about her knowing who you are," Wu Chen said. Su Qingying blinked, glanced at the phone again, and asked Wu Chen in a low voice, "Husband, who is it? Is it okay?" Although she whispered, the phone was nearby. Li Ruobing heard it. "Husband." Wu Chen not only has a woman beside him, but also calls him husband. She didn't know that Su Qingying had more than just called Wu Chen's husband during those 4 hours. "As for who, you'll know if you just ask her." "It's okay," Wu Chen said with a smile. Su Qingying finally took the phone and cleared her throat. "Hello, who are you?" Su Qingying's tone was very formal and polite instead of the previous lazy and soft tone. "Who are you?" Li Ruobing asked directly, with a cold tone. "Who are you?" Su Qingying frowned, asked back, and turned to look at Wu Chen. Wu Chen still gave her a reassuring smile. "I'm Li Ruobing." Li Ruobing was straightforward. Su Qingying's hand shook, and she almost didn't grab the phone. She sat up suddenly from the quilt, and stared at Wu Chen with wide eyes. "Who are you?" Li Ruobing asked again. She had already said it, but Su Qingying still hadn't introduced herself. It turned out to be Miss Li. Su Qingying took a deep breath, quickly adjusted her emotions, and said in a still normal and polite tone, "We met before, at a business banquet." "Who the hell are you?" Li Ruobing asked again. Su Qingying took another deep breath. In fact, she was confused now, and she was super nervous, but she could hide this nervousness very well. "I'm Su Qingying," Su Qingying said. She admitted it. Because she understood that since Li Ruobing knew that there were other women around her boyfriend, and she was also looking for Wu Chen at home, then Li Ruobing would definitely be able to find her if she did a search. What's more, she knew that if she didn't admit it, she would be in trouble instead. If Li Ruobing brought someone to kill her, she might be in trouble. But Li Ruobing knew that she was Su Qingying. On the contrary, she wouldn't do that. Because she was the daughter of Su Ruiwen of Jinfu Group. Anyone who wanted to touch her had to think about it, especially in the East China Sea. Su Qingying didn't understand why Wu Chen dared to be so bold. He dared to let his girlfriend know that there were other women around him. He's crazy. Wasn't Wu Chen afraid of death? Because Wu Chen took the initiative to let her speak, she couldn't figure it out. But she could confirm it. If Li Ruobing knew about her, he would be fine, but Wu Chen would be the one who had trouble. She was going to make a big deal as he dared to cuckold Li Ruobing. After Su Qingying finished telling who she was, the other end of the phone fell silent. Li Ruobing was so shocked. Of course Su Qingying wouldn't know. Miss Li, are you still there? Su Qingying heard the silence on the phone and asked. Are you Su Qingying? Li Ruobing asked again. That's right. Why are you with Wu Chen? What's your relationship? We're friends, we're talking about work. Su Qingying said in a super calm tone. She might have forgotten because she was too nervous, but she called Wu Chen husband before. She subconsciously ignored it because she called it casually. She still wanted to cover it up, and of course it would be best if she could lie to her. Friend. Yes, friend. Does Ms. Li not allow your boyfriend to make friends? Then we won't meet next time. Friend, but you call him husband. Who are you lying to? Ah, this. Su Qingying couldn't hide her nervousness all of a sudden, and it was written on her face. That, Miss Li, did you hear me wrong? I didn't him that. No, didn't you call? Miss Li, do you think I'm that kind of woman? Why don't you think about it again? What Su Qingying said made Li Ruobing doubt her hearing. Because, Su Qingying had always given everyone a good feeling. The public's evaluation of her, and everything she had shown were contrary to the current situation. But when Li Ruobing thought about it carefully, she felt that something was wrong. How could she hear it wrong? That may be because I heard it wrong. Li Ruobing controlled her emotions and said, I'm sorry, Miss Su, to disturb your discussion. Please give Wu Chen the phone. Su Qingying breathed a sigh of relief and handed the phone to Wu Chen. Finished. Wu Chen put the phone next to his ear and said, Where are you? Li Ruobing asked directly. Old house. Wu Chen replied. Don't go. Don't go. Do. Li Ruobing hung up after finishing speaking. Wu Chen took a look at the phone, smiled, and put the phone on the side cabinet. Of course he guessed why Li Ruobing didn't let him go, because Li Ruobing would kill him right away. She would find out what's going on. After she came over, it should be very interesting. Aren't you afraid that she will know? Su Qingying finally asked, with a surprised and puzzled expression. Chapter 84. Fake. It's fake again. Su Qingying really didn't know what Wu Chen was thinking. Originally, when Wu Chen hugged her, this was already Wu Chen's handle. The two held each other's handle and kept each other's secrets. So from the very beginning, this matter was not a threat to Su Qingying. She also understood that Li Ruobing was such a proud woman. If her boyfriend really cheated on her, she would definitely take revenge on her boyfriend, and then kick him away. She would be very straightforward and might not even take revenge on the woman who robbed her of a man. Because she was a very strong and controlling person, she would control her man tightly. If she got bored, she would throw him away like trash. This kind of person didn't even bother to get entangled. So, what exactly was Wu Chen thinking? Crazy. Su Qingying stared at Wu Chen with wide eyes, waiting for Wu Chen's answer. Actually, Wu Chen stretched out his hand to pinch Su Qingying's face, and then let go of his hand and said, Li Ruobing and I are not boyfriend and girlfriend, this is our secret. Su Qingying's eyes widened again, and then she raised her finger to gesture, and said with an expression that I understood. Ah, I know, you guys are fake too. Yes. Wu Chen nodded with a smile. He didn't explain in detail at all, there was no need at all, what he said was the truth, and Su Qingying would believe it after hearing it, without any doubts or other doubts. Because, Li Ruobing had a criminal record, 3 times. Everyone in the Donghai business district knew that Li Ruobing was forced into marriage by her family, and then she hid in Donghai to start her own business. She had played the fake boyfriend trick 3 times, to make it seem that she was not single, and used the fake boyfriend as a shield. However, her fake boyfriend's tricks were almost unbearable. The fake boyfriend attended the banquet with Li Ruobing, yet he walked behind like a little follower. Li Ruobing didn't introduce him, and everyone thought he was Li Ruobing's assistant. That's called a humble and cautious person. This was true in public, and it must be even worse in private. Li Ruobing was probably being worshipped as a queen. That's called boyfriend. Li Ruobing would like that kind of man. All fake. But this time, after Su Qingying found out that the man who texted her was Li Ruobing's boyfriend, combined with Dong Hai's rumors about Li Ruobing's boyfriend in the past few days, she naturally believed it to be true just like everyone else. So true. Unexpectedly, this time it turned out to be a fake. Only Li Ruobing and I know about this matter. In order to perform well, even her younger brother doesn't know about it. You must keep it a secret, understand? Wu Chen said. Of course I won't say it. Isn't that just looking for trouble for myself? Su Qingying moved towards Wu Chen and said, the relationship between Li Ruobing and Wu Chen was related to her relationship with Wu Chen, and it was also related to her own secret. She wouldn't dare to say it with 100 courage. And she's not one to give away secrets. Oh, then, you lied to me. Su Qingying suddenly realized that when she moved over, she was kneeling and sitting next to Wu Chen, squinting at Wu Chen, the handle you sent is fake. You're not afraid of Li Ruobing at all. Don't you know that I knew your secret and came here to disrupt your life on purpose? Do you regret it? Wu Chen smiled without denying it. Su Qingying narrowed her eyes and suddenly smiled. She turned around, lay on Wu Chen's lap, hugged Wu Chen's waist, raised her head and replied obediently, no. She didn't regret it. Not only did she not regret it, but she seemed to be happier. She felt that she should thank Wu Chen, who helped her take this step, so that she finally had the courage to start resisting her mother. And today could also be said to be the most relaxed, comfortable, self-centered, and comfortable day in her 27 years of life. She was a masochiste, and Wu Chen really conquered her in those 4 hours. In fact, she was already somewhat reluctant to part with Wu Chen. What she originally thought was that if she let go completely today, it would become the most precious day in her life, but tomorrow, she would go home to face the storm, and nothing would happen to her in the end. She would still inherit the family business, life would once again proceed step by step and get back on track. She planned to stop contacting Wu Chen after today. Even if everything Wu Chen showed was as she wanted, and even made her feel that Wu Chen was the man was destined to beat her, she could no longer contact Wu Chen. There were many reasons, the most important one was that Wu Chen is Li Ruobing's boyfriend. She couldn't do that, she couldn't get entangled with Wu Chen. And now, she knew that Wu Chen was also a fake boyfriend. She was really happy, because in the future, she could secretly be with Wu Chen and do some pleasurable things. Get up and get dressed. Li Ruobing will be here in a while. Maybe half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. Wu Chen pinched Su Qingying's face and said. She's going here. Su Qingying sat up again, nervous subconsciously, what will she be doing here? Look at you. I'm fake with her, but I go out with her in the open, and I'm real with you, but I have to hide you. She needs to feel at ease, you understand. Wu Chen smiled. Then, Su Qingying seemed to have figured something out, and relaxed, then I'll just be normal, right? Yes. Wu Chen nodded. Then can you not telling her my secret and just say that we are secretly dating, okay? Su Qingying begged. Okay. Wu Chen nodded and smiled again. Love you. Su Qingying hugged Wu Chen and kissed her, then got up and began to dress. Although Su Qingying's love affair was also a secret, which was not allowed by the Su family, Su Qingying was not afraid of being known by Li Ruobing. When she learned that Wu Chen lied to her just now, she had already realized that although Wu Chen's handle was false, Wu Chen gave her a new handle, which was a secret that he and Li Ruobing could never tell outside, false relationship. So, not only she and Wu Chen reformed a balance of holding each other, but Li Ruobing was also among them, and the three of them formed an ingenious balance. With Su Qingying's IQ, she fully realized that she might have fallen into the trap carefully arranged by Wu Chen, and the abyss-like quagmire was swallowing her. But not only was she not disgusted, but she enjoyed it a little. Wu Chen was using a way that she liked to control her. She was willing. All along, she hoped that there would be a strong man to conquer herself. Wu Chen was that man. Su Qingying was now looking forward to meeting Li Ruobing, because she felt that the three of them formed a very secretive small group, with the feeling of being one of my own, and she could communicate with Li Ruobing in a relaxed state, without having to hold back or pretend. However, what she didn't know was that although the relationship between Li Ruobing and Wu Chen was fake, but it was already developing in the direction of a fake show. More than half an hour. Boom boom boom. There was a knock on the door of Wu Chen's house. Wu Chen went to open the door. Of course it was Li Ruobing. The moment the door opened, Li Ruobing outside the door stared at Wu Chen with a very strange look. Chapter 85. Mental Explosion. Li Ruobing. Li Ruobing's mentality was blown. On the way she drove here, it could be said that she racked her brains and frantically calculated all kinds of possibilities, but she couldn't find a reasonable explanation. So why did they get together? Why did she call him husband? Su Qingying was not that kind of woman. She understood that the problem was not with Su Qingying, but with Wu Chen. This man Wu Chen was like a ghost, mysterious and unpredictable. Come on, why are you looking at me like that? My face is blooming again. Wu Chen smiled, invited Li Ruobing in, and brought Li Ruobing slippers. Carrying her bag, Li Ruobing kicked off her high-heeled shoes, stepped on the slippers, and looked around at the same time. She knew the exact address of Wu Chen's old house, but she had never been there. She always had to look around in unfamiliar places, and she was looking for someone. Wu Chen's house was still full of life. He moved out the day before yesterday, so he took away some clothes and daily necessities, and everything else was there. He didn't clean it up. Li Ruobing smelled the aroma of the food. It was not time to cook, and it was unknown who floated over from the window. She also heard the sound of buzzing. When she walked into the living room and looked around, she noticed that the door of the bathroom was open, and the washing machine inside was spinning. He didn't know why Wu Chen was in the mood to wash clothes at this time. Where is she? Li Ruobing walked to the tea table before turning around and asking. Wu Chen raised his hand to signal, pointing to the kitchen. At this time, honey, is Miss Li here? Su Qingying in the kitchen took a few steps back, turned her head sideways to look out. The angle of view was just so that she could see Li Ruobing, and Li Ruobing could also see her. Miss Li, long time no see. Su Qingying greeted with a smile, her voice soft was polite. Miss Su, yes, long time no see. Li Ruobing was stunned, stuttering. Because Su Qingying had her hair tied up. She was wearing sleeves and apron, and she held a spoon in her hand, looking like wife at home cooking. She was cooking. The sense of violation was explosive. Su Qingying had always been so glamorous and beautiful. She was a billionaire. She was stunning. She was someone people could only watch from afar. Cook. She was cooking for Wu Chen. She could cook. Yes, Su Qingying really knew how to cook. When she was at home, she was not allowed to cook or learn to cook, saying that it would hurt her hands. Su Qingying learned to cook from the nanny who took care of her during the years when she was studying abroad. In fact, Wu Chen didn't want Su Qingying to cook for him. It was proposed by Su Qingying. She first said that she was hungry. Wu Chen said that she would wait for Li Ruobing to come and eat together. Then she said that she would do it, that she would entertain Li Ruobing. Wu Chen didn't care, so he agreed. The water and electricity had not been cut off at home, and there were still some food ingredients in the refrigerator, but not many, so before Li Ruobing came, Wu Chen went downstairs to buy vegetable. The vegetable market was nearby, and he came back in 10 minutes. And Su Qingying not only cooked, but also did the laundry on her own initiative. What she washed were the dirty clothes and bed sheets that Wu Chen's house had thrown around before. Wu Chen understood her state of mind. She just wanted to try the life of a normal person. Husband, please talk first. The soup is almost ready. I will scramble an egg, and we can eat in a while, Su Qingying said, retracted again, and continued to work in the kitchen with great interest. Li Ruobing's face was still blank. She slowly turned her head to look at Wu Chen. She was very stiff as if being possessed by a ghost, her eyes gradually widened. She looked at Wu Chen, then pulled Wu Chen violently, and moved to the side. After taking 2 steps, she asked urgently in a low voice, "What's the situation?" She felt like she was crazy. Because, weird. Everything was weird. For example, when she talked to Su Qingying, the last thing she said was that Su Qingying denied calling her husband. She pretended to believe it, and then came to have a look, but when she came, Su Qingying called Wu Chen husband in front of her. She even greeted her naturally and kindly. Did she have amnesia? Is she schizophrenic? Still cooking. Want another scrambled egg? Li Ruobing didn't know whether she was crazy or the world was crazy. She even had some doubts, whether Wu Chen found a woman who looked like Su Qingying, or had plastic surgery to look like Su Qingying, and deliberately asked her to act to deceive her. She had doubts for a moment, but immediately denied it herself. Because, the face could be adjusted, but the temperament and feeling couldn't. Especially temperament, which had been cultivated over the years. Su Qingying's temperament, even if she wore an apron that was somewhat oily due to years of use, and held a big spoon in her hand, she still gave people a natural feeling of a fairy cooking. For the convenience of cooking, Su Qingying temporarily tied up her wavy hair, which fully exposed the outline of her cheeks. Her face was very small and her skin was very good. Although she was 27 years old, she felt like she was only 18 this year. She could not be fake. But if she was real, it's even more terrifying. What the hell is going on? Nothing. She's just my woman, Wu Chen said with a smile. Your woman? How did she become your woman? When did it happen? Today. Today. Did you know her well before? No, not familiar. You, Li Ruobing really exploded mentality, pulling Wu Chen to ask in a low voice, speaking very fast. Husband, the rice is ready. I'm cooking. Open the pot and turn it over. My aunt taught me that it would be delicious. Su Qingying, who was busy in the kitchen, called Wu Chen. Coming. Wu Chen agreed and motioned to Li Ruobing, I'm going. Wu Chen entered the kitchen. Naturally, Li Ruobing didn't follow. She casually threw the bag on the sofa, and then raised her hand to cover her forehead. She suspected that she was sick. Am I sick? Is there a problem with my brain and I'm hallucinating? Honey, it's hot. Su Qingying's voice came from the kitchen again. The sportswear is so stuffy, and I'm sweating in an apron. Do you have any clothes I can wear? Yes, some old clothes, but they are clean. By the way, my previous pajamas are in the bedroom cabinet, on the far left, folded underneath, blue ones. Watch the pot, I'll change. Go. From when she came out of the kitchen, seeing Li Ruobing still standing by the coffee table, she smiled and nodded and said, Miss Li, sit down first. Don't stand, the meal will be ready soon, very soon. While speaking, she entered the bedroom and closed the door. Li Ruobing really sat down, expressionless. She felt that she needed to calm down. 2 minutes later, Su Qingying came out of the bedroom. She was wearing pajamas, holding an apron in her hand. She put on the apron and tied it up as she walked out. Beep beep. There was a sudden beep in the bathroom. It was from the washing machine. The clothes were washed and dried automatically, and they could be taken out. Su Qingying turned her head and took a look, then walked into the bathroom, and at the same time yelled to Wu Chen in the kitchen, Husband, do you hang the clothes on the balcony after washing? Can't the sheets be dried? Li Ruobing stood up. The clothes were also washed by Su Qingying. Li Ruobing, who had just calmed down, exploded again. Chapter 86. The atmosphere suddenly became weird. I must be crazy. It's all crazy. Li Ruobing suddenly felt that this world was extremely unreal, as if she was watching a bizarre movie. As if she was watching this world from the perspective of a bystander. She saw Su Qingying coming out of the bathroom holding the basin, which was full of freshly washed clothes and sheets. She saw Su Qingying walk to the balcony, put the clothes on a drying rack, hang her head up, and pat the hung clothes with her hands to make them more even. Husband, the sheets can't be hung. I'm coming, I'll get the shelf. The voices of the two felt ethereal. Li Ruobing saw Wu Chen coming out of the kitchen, went to another room first, and came out again soon, holding a portable folding clothes drying pole in his hand. Wu Chen arranged the clothes rail in the living room. Su Qingying walked to him with the basin in her arms, and the two of them pulled apart the washed sheets together, each pulling one end, shaking it first, and then putting it on the folding clothes rail. "Husband, did you watch the pot?" Su Qingying exclaimed suddenly, and trotted to the kitchen. "I already turned off the fire, don't worry," Wu Chen turned around and said. The two entered the kitchen one after another, and soon came out with plates, and the food was on the table. Li Ruobing heard the invitation in a daze, and she accepted it. Slap. "Miss Li, is this enough?" It wasn't until Su Qingying filled a bowl of rice and placed it in front of Li Ruobing that Li Ruobing, who had already went to the table and sat across from them, woke up from the sleepwalking state. "Ah, that's enough, thank you." Li Ruobing agreed in a trance, and finally became fully awake. She looked at the two sitting opposite her, and then turned her head to look around. The window of the balcony was open, and the clothes to dry were gently shaking in the wind. In the empty space between the coffee table and the TV cabinet in the living room, the folding clothes rail was opened, and the sheets were spread on it. The scent of lavender laundry detergent filled the whole room. Real. Everything is true. Li Ruobing looked across the table again. Su Qingying's sitting posture was very standard, very ladylike. She would never hunch while sitting. This was a habit that had been cultivated all the year round, and it was not deliberate. She had already taken off her apron, and she was wearing blue men's pajamas. Her hair was also loose. The wavy hair made her a little more mature, but her demeanor at this time that of a young woman. Li Ruobing's pupils shrank suddenly, because she noticed that Su Qingying was only wearing Wu Chen's pajamas, without underwear. "Has it reached this point? Honey, try this. I haven't cooked for a long time. Tell me whether it's salty or not." Su Qingying was picking up vegetables for Wu Chen, putting a piece of lean meat into Wu Chen's bowl. Wu Chen tasted it and said with a smile, "It's just right. Miss Li, you can eat it too. Try it quickly." Su Qingying looked at Li Ruobing again, and smiled politely. "Oh, Li Ruobing made a vague sound, took a deep breath, and forced herself to calm down. She looked at several dishes on the table. 4 dishes and 1 soup. Mushu meat, scrambled eggs with chives, white-cut chicken, brine shrimp, and winter melon soup. They were all very simple home-cooked dishes. It seemed that the poached chicken should be cooked food bought directly from the market, not homemade, and other dishes were also easy to make. Li Ruobing disliked simple food, but these dishes were actually made by Su Qingying. Picking up the chopsticks, Li Ruobing took a taste of scrambled eggs with chives and the taste turned out to be very good. She was definitely not the level of a chef, but it was also definitely not at the level of a housewife. "Is it delicious?" Su Qingying asked Li Ruobing expectantly. "Delicious." Li Ruobing nodded and forced a smile. "Salty or not?" Su Qingying asked again. "Not salty, just right," Li Ruobing said. "Eat more if it tastes good." Su Qingying was really happy. She did what her family didn't let her do, and she did well, how could she be unhappy? The three officially began to eat. Li Ruobing was really not in the mood to eat, but she didn't want to be left out. She was here to figure them out. "Miss Su, how long have you been with Wu Chen?" Li Ruobing asked casually. "Not long," Su Qingying replied, turning her head to look at Wu Chen. Her eyes were full of love. We fell in love at first sight. Love is unreasonable. From the moment I saw him, I knew that he was my destined person." Su Qingying's words were disgusting. Li Ruobing didn't believe a word. She knew that it was not surprising for a woman like Su Qingying to fall in love with a man, but love at first sight was absolutely impossible. Her family background, what haven't she seen? There must be something. "I see," Li Ruobing replied. "By the way, Ms. Li, he told me about you and my husband." Su Qingying took the initiative to speak and said in a low voice, "You are not a real couple, right?" Li Ruobing held the chopsticks in her hand. After a pause, she turned her head sharply and looked at Wu Chen. Wu Chen actually told other women the secret of the two of them. Seeing Li Ruobing's reaction, Su Qingying thought that Li Ruobing was just worried about leaking the secret, so she immediately said, "Don't worry, Miss Li, I won't tell, but please keep this a secret for us. Our love affair cannot be known by the outside world yet. Wu Chen was eating very calmly. Seeing Li Ruobing looking over, he smiled and said, "Eat, what are you looking at me for?" Li Ruobing still looked at Wu Chen. "Miss Li, don't be angry." Su Qingying reached out and pressed the back of Li Ruobing's hand. "Don't worry, I really won't say anything. You can continue the act, even if there are some intimate actions in public, I don't mind. You should also understand my husband. Your relationship is fake. He cooperates with you in acting, but he can't stop dating because of you, right? In order to avoid misunderstanding, he must tell you when he is in love, right?" Su Qingying's logic was very clear and correct. After hearing this, Li Ruobing felt very uncomfortable. She didn't feel that Su Qingying was demonstrating to her, but she said, "My husband," and she didn't know why it sounded harsh. "I'm fine, it doesn't matter." Li Ruobing smiled at Su Qingying, smiling naturally. But when Su Qingying turned her attention to Wu Chen again, she instantly restrained her smile. "My husband, eat this. My husband, try this. Miss Li, have you been busy with work recently? Miss Li, your skin is really good. What skincare products do you usually use?" Su Qingying dominated the topic at the dinner table. Well, she couldn't talk so much at the dinner table before. She couldn't hold back, and she talked a lot today. She was not stupid and sweet, her language ability was particularly strong, and her logic was so clear that even Li Ruobing could hardly get her words out. She couldn't ask anything special at all. Su Qingying ate a little more than usual for this meal. After eating a bowl of rice without knowing it, she filled another half bowl and ate it all. The upbringing at home did not allow her to eat too fast. Everything she did today was a rebound after long-term suppression. Although she finished eating, she was still feeding Wu Chen. "Husband, eat prawns, eat more." She peeled the prawns and put them in Wu Chen's bowl again and again, and it was very greasy. Li Ruobing watched, feeling more and more irritable in her heart. Li Ruobing suddenly put down her chopsticks and raised her hand to support her forehead. There was an impulse in her heart. "I don't know why I am like this." A few seconds later, she suddenly reached out and took out a bright red brine shrimp from the plate, quickly removed the head of the shrimp, and peeled off the shell. "Husband, here you go." Su Qingying put another peeled shrimp in Wu Chen's bowl. "Here, eat the shrimp." Immediately afterwards, another hand reached over, and also put the peeled shrimp into Wu Chen's bowl. Li Ruobing, of course. Su Qingying was taken aback for a moment, then turned her head to look at Li Ruobing abruptly. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became strange. Chapter 87, Provocation and Counterattack. Li Ruobing regretted it. The second she put the shrimp into Wu Chen's bowl, she regretted it. She could fully think of the consequences of doing this, and she felt that this was not like herself. For a man to protest with another woman. Of course she was not afraid of Su Qingying. But she also understood that if she did this, Wu Chen might have some thoughts about her. He might find an opportunity to ask her if she fell in love with him, and she might even be teased and ridiculed by Wu Chen. Li Ruobing would never be a woman who actively catered to men and submitted to men. Su Qingying turned her head sharply to look at Li Ruobing. Li Ruobing paused for a moment, then smiled at Wu Chen and said, "Eat, eat more." As she spoke, she picked up the chopsticks, picked up a piece of white-cut chicken, and put it in Su Qingying's bowl. "Miss Su, you can eat too." Li Ruobing smiled at Su Qingying naturally, gestured to the table again, and said with a smile, "There are still a lot of dishes, and the rest will be wasted. You should both eat more, I'm full." Li Ruobing felt that she had done something wrong, so she quickly made amends. Instead of giving food for Wu Chen alone, she did it for Wu Chen and Su Qingying. The weird atmosphere was suddenly relieved. Su Qingying froze for a moment, and then seemed to understand something. "Is Miss Li full? Don't you want to eat more?" Su Qingying asked. "I'm full, thank you for the hospitality. You guys eat." Li Ruobing and Su Qingying looked at each other, and then smiled after speaking. Rough tea and light meals are nothing like hospitality. Su Qingying looked at Li Ruobing with a smile on her face. My husband originally said that when Ms. Li came, we would go out to eat together or go to a restaurant. I think since everyone is at home, I will do it. The highest etiquette for hospitality is a family banquet. You are a guest, and this is the first time we have met in this capacity, so, it's good that Ms. Li is satisfied. After hearing Su Qingying's words, Li Ruobing's heart was on fire. Because she felt that Su Qingying was provoking her. Come home, hospitality, family dinner, guest. Su Qingying directly put herself in the position of the hostess. Although she spoke very naturally and her thinking was very fast, Li Ruobing still felt it was deliberate. Su Qingying should have noticed something was wrong with her, but she just didn't point it out. A woman's intuition was usually terrifying, and it was a woman who understood women best. After Su Qingying finished speaking, she turned her head to look at Wu Chen, then looked at the bowl and said, "Husband, why don't you eat it?" As she spoke, she picked up her chopsticks and picked up the shrimps in the bowl. It was Li Ruobing who put the shrimp in Wu Chen's bowl. She directly handed the shrimp to Wu Chen's mouth, but suddenly her hand trembled. Slap! The shrimp fell on the table first, and then bounced to the ground. Oh, I'm so stupid. It's dirty now, forget it, Su Qingying said to herself. She picked up a shrimp from Wu Chen's bowl. Of course, she peeled them herself. Come on, husband, why don't you eat? I'll feed you. Seeing Wu Chen eat the shrimp he fed, Su Qingying smiled sweetly. She shuddered at the ends of her chopsticks, then put them down, looked at Li Ruobing and asked with a smile, Miss Li, really don't want to eat anymore? She was provocative, swearing sovereignty with a smile without the slightest anger. She was challenging Li Ruobing. I'm really full, thank you. Li Ruobing breathed a little harder, but she also smiled. The two women looked at each other and suddenly stopped talking. Although Li Ruobing was smiling, he felt her aura, a feeling that she might turn the table over at any time. I'm full too, I can't eat any more, Wu Chen said suddenly at this moment. He stood up and wanted to clear the dining table. Su Qingying immediately stood up, stopped Wu Chen, took the initiative to clean up, and said, Husband, don't clean up. I will do it, I will clean up, I will wash the dishes. You can sit there with Miss Li, don't neglect the guest. After saying this, Su Qingying glanced at Li Ruobing intentionally, or unintentionally. Wu Chen did not compete with Su Qingying. He knew that Su Qingying really wanted to do this. Wu Chen raised his eyes to look at Li Ruobing, and gave Li Ruobing a look. Li Ruobing stood up abruptly and walked towards the sofa. Su Qingying packed up the dishes and went into the kitchen, and soon she could hear the sound of running water. A billionaire really went to wash the dishes. Wu Chen was in front of the tea table, moved the shelf for drying the sheets, and turned on the TV with the remote control. It made some noise, and then he sat down next to Li Ruobing. What the hell are you doing? Li Ruobing looked at the TV, gritted her teeth and asked in a low voice. If you lose, you lose. Why ask so much? Wu Chen glanced at Li Ruobing sideways with a smile, and his voice was also very soft. Masked by the sound of the TV, it was impossible for Su Qingying in the kitchen to hear what the two were talking about. In order to win against me, you went to offend the Su family. You really dared to do it. Li Ruobing whispered again. At this moment she has fully judged why the Su family investigated Wu Chen. Of course it was because Wu Chen abducted Su Qingying. But she still couldn't figure it out. Even if Wu Chen bypassed the Su family, this woman Su Qingying, why did she follow Wu Chen? It seemed that she not only fell in love with Wu Chen directly, but also feared that Wu Chen would be snatched away. No, you're wrong. Wu Chen denied. If you don't believe me, you can ask her when was the first time I contacted her. It was earlier than our bet. So, how did you do it? Guess. Li Ruobing stopped talking all of a sudden. She knew what Wu Chen was unwilling to say, and she would never be able to get the answer. Oh, Wu Chen suddenly covered the back of his neck with his hands. He twisted his neck, looking very uncomfortable, then moved his shoulders twice. He said to himself, I'm so tired. I've been tossing around for a long time. I feel sore all over. After speaking, he stopped, turned to look at Li Ruobing and said, "Give me a massage." It's not a discussion, it's not a request, it's a statement. It's a command. He just asked Li Ruobing to give him a massage. Because Li Ruobing lost to him again in a bet, he could ask Li Ruobing to do so. At that time, the two used conditions as barriers. Li Ruobing's condition was that if he won, Wu Chen would kneel down and apologize, but Wu Chen's condition was, he said that he was exercising recently and needed more massages. So if he lost, Wu Chen would kneel down and apologize. If Wu Chen won, Li Ruobing would massage him 100 times. Instead of paying off once, she had to massage 100 times. As long as it's not in public, Wu Chen could make her massage him. Li Ruobing took a deep breath, then gritted her teeth and said in a low voice, "You really know how to pick your time. It's okay, don't force it," Wu Chen said indifferently, curling his lips into a smile. Li Ruobing turned her head to look at the kitchen door. She thought for a moment, then stood up suddenly, unbuttoning her jacket, and said, "I'll massage you. Will I do it here? Or go to your bedroom?" Li Ruobing wanted to fight back. She knew that Su Qingying might see it, but she couldn't be sure when Su Qingying would finish washing the dishes. But she was not afraid of being seen by Su Qingying. She even hoped that Su Qingying would see them. She didn't fight back against Su Qingying before because she was afraid that Wu Chen would misunderstand her, but now she lost to Wu Chen for the massage. She should fulfill the contract, and it didn't involve any relationship issues between men and women. But if Su Qingying saw it, Su Qingying would definitely misunderstand. Bedroom. Wu Chen stood up. 20 minutes later. Su Qingying tidied up the kitchen, walked out and said, "Husband, are you talking to E.H.?" Chapter 88. What's wrong with you? Su Qingying stood at the door of the kitchen and glanced at the living room, only to find that there was no one in the living room. "Husband!" Su Qingying yelled again, walked into the living room and looked around. She saw that all the other doors were open, only the master bedroom door was closed, and there were some voices inside. Su Qingying frowned suspiciously, walked over, opened the door directly, and then froze at the door. Wu Chen was only wearing boxers lying on the mattress, while Li Ruobing was dressed neatly, but took off her coat. She temporarily tied up her long straight black hair, and she rolled up the sleeves of her white shirt. The issue was, Li Ruobing actually sat on Wu Chen's back waist, pressing Wu Chen's back shoulder with both hands. She was actually giving Wu Chen a massage. Su Qingying was shocked. As a woman, Li Ruobing was strong, domineering and courageous. She did not yield or surrender. Su Qingying even heard her father mention that when Li Ruobing was forced into marriage by her grandfather, she scolded her grandfather in front of everyone in the family, and then her uncle came over to slap her, and she slapped her back. Li Ruobing was really strong. It's not pretending. She was not only tough outside, but also at home. A woman like her would even give massages. Would she serve a man like this? Su Qingying couldn't believe it. She felt that if it was herself, with her reputation outside, after she got married, she would serve her husband at home and give him massages. If people knew about this, it would not destroy her personality. It would even give her a good reputation as a good wife, and bring her closer to perfection. It was normal for a wife to give a massage to her husband, or a girlfriend to give a massage to her boyfriend. As for Su Qingying's own halo, her reputation was good, but it's not special. She's just good in all aspects. Li Ruobing's reputation was special. Even if she is married, no one thought that she would serve men. Her husband must serve her and treat her like a queen. She was the queen of the house. So, Su Qingying looked at Li Ruobing, who was giving Wu Chen a massage in the room. She was frightened. Immediately afterwards, she saw another scene that shocked her even more. Li Ruobing raised her head, and when she saw Su Qingying at the door, she just glanced at her lightly, then lowered her head again. She continued to massage Wu Chen. She actually continued to give Wu Chen a massage. Seeing someone coming, she continued to do it. No distractions. Dedicated. Su Qingying's mentality was the same as Li Ruobing's before, and she exploded instantly. The image of Li Ruobing in her heart was instantly destroyed, collapsed. She even thought she was hallucinating. Fake. This must be fake. You're finished washing. You must tired, take a break first. We'll be done in a bit. Wu Chen, who was lying there, raised his head at this time. He smiled at Su Qingying. Su Qingying stared blankly at Wu Chen. Suddenly, her heart moved. Well, could it be? It can't be. Su Qingying seemed to understand it all at once. She thought of a possibility, the most extreme possibility, but she thought it was the most recent truth. That was, Li Ruobing was the same kind of person as herself. This was the most bizarre possibility. But this kind of weirdness happened once, and it was Su Qingying herself. If it was the same attribute as herself, then everything would make sense. She was very strong and domineering, but she was also like her. She was not what she looked like. She lived a false life. The oppression of her family forces her to pretend to be strong. The stronger she was on the surface, the more secretly she hoped that there would be a man stronger than herself to conquer her. Wu Chen said that the two were not a real couple, they were pretending. But Wu Chen didn't say whether the two had any other relationship. So she was just like herself. Everything became reasonable. Li Ruobing clearly saw Wu Chen's girlfriend coming, but she ignored her. She continued to concentrate on massaging Wu Chen, just because she was the same, and she didn't care about other people's eyes at the moment. Su Qingying figured it out. She felt she was right. Even the way she looked at Li Ruobing softened. Because, she was not a rival in love at all, but a fellow. Su Qingying even loved the way she looked at Wu Chen. Wu Chen could even conquer Li Ruobing. He was stronger than Su Qingying imagined. Of course, Su Qingying hoped that the man who could whip her was strong. Su Qingying didn't want any normal woman to snatch her man away, she would really snatch him back. But if that woman is like herself, that's another matter. Li Ruobing was really concentrating on massaging Wu Chen. This was her counterattack against Su Qingying. She was quite happy in her heart, because Wu Chen didn't explain anything even when Su Qingying came over suddenly. On the contrary, he cooperated with her very much, taking as if this was normal and natural. She didn't know what Su Qingying was thinking at the moment, let alone what a terrible situation Wu Chen had set up. Su Qingying stood at the door and watched for a while. Li Ruobing was still wondering if Su Qingying would suddenly collapse in anger and run away crying. Suddenly, Su Qingying moved. She went into the bedroom and closed the door. Li Ruobing, who was paying attention to the situation from the corner of her eye, was taken aback for a moment. What is this for? Su Qingying kicked off the slippers, went to the bed, and sat next to Wu Chen. She smiled to her, "Sister, let's massage together." Saying that, Su Qingying stretched out her hand and began to massage Wu Chen's arm. Li Ruobing's face looked like a ghost, and he was completely stunned, almost stupefied. A woman, after seeing her boyfriend being massaged by other women, not only did she not get angry, but she even joined in. She joined the massage. She also called her sister. What sister? Su Qingying was a few months older than her. Why did she call her sister? Sister, what's wrong with you? Seeing that Li Ruobing's expression was not right, Su Qingying asked. She smiled sweetly. This smile made all the hairs on Li Ruobing's body explode. Subscribe to Chinese Novel Audio Wave. Chapter 89, Dead End. It can't be a dead end. Li Ruobing looked at Su Qingying as if she had seen a ghost, but she couldn't utter a single word. To be honest, a trace of fear had already appeared in her heart at this moment, as if she was in a horror movie and encountered a supernatural event. What is going on with this woman, Su Qingying? Mental illness. Impossible. If Su Qingying had a mental illness, she would not be as perfect as the rumors said, and she would not be able to become the successor of the Jinfu group. The more outstanding a person was, the less likely she was to have a mental illness, because only those who have enough self-control could perform so well. The ultimate excellence did not make mistakes. Li Ruobing thought about it, slowly turned her head, and looked at Wu Chen's back again. She thought about it. It's not that Su Qingying had a problem. The problem was Wu Chen. Although she couldn't figure out what method Wu Chen used to win Su Qingying immediately, and even make Su Qingying love him so much that she didn't mind that he had other women. She was even willing to share this man with other women. She couldn't think of how Wu Chen did it. The problem must be Wu Chen. Sister, what are you thinking? Su Qingying said again, and she stretched out her hand and waved in front of Li Ruobing's eyes. The reason why she called her sister was because she was only with Wu Chen today, and Li Ruobing had obviously been with Wu Chen for a while. Li Ruobing followed Wu Chen first, so she was the older sister. Can you stop calling me sister? Li Ruobing finally replied, squinting at Su Qingying and asked. She didn't want to hear call her sister, and panicked. Oh, that's good, Ms. Li. Su Qingying immediately changed her words. In fact, she was not very willing to bark. She just felt that Li Ruobing came first. Qingying, don't forget to take your medicine, Wu Chen said suddenly, reminding her. Ah yes, I almost forgot. Husband, do you have any at home? No, then I'll go downstairs to buy. As soon as Su Qingying said that, she got up, and directly, lifted her clothes. Li Ruobing seemed to be seeing a ghost again. Her eyes widened rapidly. Although she was also a woman, Su Qingying just changed clothes in front of her. Is she really, all right? Li Ruobing just watched. Su Qingying threw Wu Chen's pajamas aside. She really wasn't wearing anything else. Li Ruobing saw some scars on Su Qingying's body. Because Wu Chen didn't do it hard, most of the traces almost disappeared, so Li Ruobing couldn't see what Wu Chen did to Su Qingying. She could only see that the two played crazy. Su Qingying quickly changed her clothes. She put on the sportswear, put on the sun hat, and put on the mask. Go ahead, I'll be back in a while. Su Qingying said and hurried out. She knew where there were pharmacies. These days, pharmacies were everywhere. When she came back with Wu Chen, she noticed it when she got off the car. There was a pharmacy just around the corner. Su Qingying left the bedroom, and soon heard the sound of the door opening and closing again. Li Ruobing, who was sitting on Wu Chen's back, stood up when she heard the door close outside. She jumped off the bed, took a few steps to one side, and put down her rolled-up sleeves while staring straight at the door. She looked at Wu Chen. Wu Chen also sat up and began to put on his clothes. He knew that Li Ruobing at this moment would never be in the mood to continue massaging him. Aren't you going to explain? Wu Chen. Li Ruobing let her hair down again, shook her head, and then stared at Wu Chen with her arms on her shoulders. Why don't you give me 100 million, then I'll tell you the truth. Wu Chen raised his head and said with a smile. Interesting. Li Ruobing narrowed his eyes. Of course, she couldn't give Wu Chen 100 million in exchange for this kind of information. Because it had nothing to do with her. The bet had already been lost. Although she didn't know how Wu Chen did it, it didn't affect the outcome of the bet. How did Wu Chen get Su Qingying and what happened between the two of them? Although Li Ruobing was so curious that she exploded, she would definitely not give Wu Chen 100 million yuan for that. Interesting, very interesting. Rally. Wu Chen laughed while talking. If you don't tell me, I will check it out. Li Ruobing told Wu Chen clearly. Whatever. Wu Chen didn't care because it was impossible to find out. Li Ruobing took another deep breath, remained silent for a moment, looked at Wu Chen who had put on his clothes, and said, okay. I don't want to ask what happened to you and Su Qingying, but, the Su family is investigating you because of your relationship with Su Qingying, right? I ran away with her. Wu Chen stood up and said. What are you going to do? Get married. Do you think I'm the kind of man who will marry? Then what will you do? Break up. You'll never see her again, and the Su family may let you go. No, don't I have any other options? What else do you want to do? I'll take care of the Su family, otherwise. You say it as if it's easy. Li Ruobing said, holding her forehead, walked to the window, and looked at it. Looking out the window, she was a little irritable, not only because Wu Chen had Su Qingying by her side, but also because she herself was involved in this matter. The Su family had already found Wu Chen. And she, Li Ruobing, was Wu Chen's girlfriend, and everyone in the East China Sea Business District knew her. So, from the perspective of the Su family, it was Li Ruobing's boyfriend who abducted Su Qingying. This was very uncomfortable. What to do? Should she put aside the relationship, saying that the relationship with Wu Chen is fake? She knew that she couldn't expose herself at this time. She had already faked it 3 times, and the 4th time she acted so real, but people learned that it was still a fake. If so, she, Li Ruobing, would never have another chance. Even if she found another man to act in the future, no matter how true the acting is, it would not be believed. She could not disregard the relationship. Then Li Ruobing wouldn't know, and if she knew, she should be angry with Wu Chen, because she was cheated on. But because the 2 of them were fake, how could she get angry with Wu Chen? She couldn't get angry with Wu Chen, otherwise she wouldn't be able to perform this kind of scene, because if Li Ruobing was really angry, someone might die. What else can I do? Separate. Just break up. Is she, Li Ruobing, the kind of woman who swallows her anger? If she is really Wu Chen's girlfriend, she should deal with Wu Chen together with the Su family. This couldn't work either. What's more, as Wu Chen's girlfriend, Wu Chen was allowed to have other women by default. Then, to bear the anger of the Su family together with Wu Chen. Start a war with the Su family. What a joke. Then what can I do? Dead end. No matter how Li Ruobing thought about it, she felt that this was a dead end with no solution. From her own point of view, no matter what kind of reaction she had, it seemed to be wrong. It was Wu Chen who got her involved in this deadlock, but she couldn't blame Wu Chen. She could not even say a single word. Because she knew in advance that Wu Chen was going to win Su Qingying. Not only did she know, she used this matter to make a bet with Wu Chen. Wu Chen then took down Su Qingying to win against her. Who could she blame? Looking out the window and pacing back and forth, Li Ruobing thought for a long time. Suddenly, she raised her head in a daze, then looked at Wu Chen straight. She realized that she had made a mistake. That was this man named Wu Chen. How could it be possible for him to leave a dead end for herself? How could this man, who was almost a ghost, block his way? Although Li Ruobing had always been thinking about how she should deal with him, her dead-end situation may not necessarily be caused by Wu Chen. She knew that Wu Chen would not endanger her, would not let her be involved, and leave her in a mess. Therefore, it was absolutely impossible for Wu Chen to leave a dead end for her. What's wrong? There must be something. Speak up if you have something to say. Seeing Li Ruobing looking directly at him, Wu Chen smiled. You just said, Li Ruobing seemed to have thought of it. Did you say, you ran away with Su Qingying? Yes. Wu Chen nodded with a smile. That is to say, the Su family doesn't know your relationship with Su Qingying. Li Ruobing said with her eyes widened. You're so smart, you finally figured it out. Wu Chen smiled, and he didn't know whether to praise or ridicule her. Li Ruobing understood, completely understood. At the same time, her body turned cold, because she felt Wu Chen's terror again, the ultimate sense of terror. She knew that she had become Wu Chen's pawn, and now she must actively cooperate with Wu Chen, and cooperate willingly. Such a man, if he was my enemy, if he was my competitor, then I am afraid that I have been played to death by him 100 times. Ding-a-ling, Wu Chen's cell phone rang. He walked over to pick it up and saw that it was an unfamiliar number, but he recognized it. It was the mobile phone number of the owner of the pharmacy downstairs. Hello. Wu Chen picked it up. It's me. It was Su Qingying. Her tone was urgent, and she subconsciously lowered her voice. Husband, I saw my family members, and they came here. They are outside the alley, next to your car. Chapter 90. Is it from the Su family? Trouble with me, Li Ruobing. In the pharmacy outside the alley, Su Qingying was leaning against the window, secretly looking out the window while making a phone call. The drugstore was full of shelves with many decorations, and various words were pasted on the windows, so Su Qingying and others could see the situation near the entrance of the alley outside, but it was impossible for the people near the entrance of the alley to see her. She was really nervous. Originally, she came here to buy contraceptive pills. After buying the pills, she was about to go out when she saw a few familiar cars approaching. She was so scared that she immediately retreated to the pharmacy because she had thrown her mobile phone out of the car window before. She could only borrow the shop owner's mobile phone. She had a good memory, and she had seen Wu Chen's cell phone number too many times before. She had seen that text message too many times. She dialed Wu Chen's cell phone number from memory. But she still made 2 mistakes before I got it right. Honey, what should I do? I'm in the pharmacy and I can't get out. It's okay. I'm going downstairs. Don't worry when we get there. I'll take care of it. Please come here. It's okay, trust me. Okay. Su Qingying hung, put on a mask immediately, and then walked back to the counter. She returned the phone to the shop owner and said thank you again. The owner of the pharmacy looked puzzled. He didn't know what was going on with the girl, but it had nothing to do with him. He didn't ask too many questions, not wanting to cause trouble. In the bedroom on the 5th floor, Wu Chen hung up the phone, turned to Li Ruobing and said, "People from the Su family are here. They are just outside the alley. Let's go down." After speaking, he walked out of the bedroom. The Su family came here, faster than Wu Chen imagined, but it was not unexpected. He didn't think that the Su family had found the old house under his parents' name, and they thought he might be here, so they came, because once the initial investigation was in the wrong direction, they would have to make a detour, and it wouldn't be so fast. The Su family checked the Lamborghini. All it took for the Su family was to use their connections to adjust the traffic monitoring and investigate and track them. Do you know that the Su family will come over at this time? Li Ruobing followed Wu Chen out of the bedroom, asking as they walked. I'm not a god, how could I know? Wu Chen went to the living room to get his coat and said while putting it on, it's just a possibility. The Su family may come over in the afternoon or they may not come. You are not afraid that they will find you, and you dare to wait for them? Li Ruobing asked again. Don't twist my words. Wu Chen smiled, looked at Li Ruobing and said, I can tell you, if you didn't call me this afternoon and didn't come to see me, then before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I will take Su Qingying away from here. If we go to have a meal or something, they won't find us. But since you're here, I didn't have to leave, do you understand? Wu Chen smiled after finishing speaking. Of course Li Ruobing understood. She just realized that she just wanted to verify whether this man was really that scary. Was there a coincidence? Now she knew, no coincidences. Wu Chen didn't take the risk of doing something uncertain. Originally, even if the Su family came here today, it would be impossible to find Wu Chen and Su Qingying here, but because she, Li Ruobing, was here, it didn't matter. Why wouldn't it matter? Because as long as Li Ruobing came, when Wu Chen was found by the Su family, it was not Wu Chen and Su Qingying who were together, but Wu Chen, Su Qingying, and Li Ruobing were together. Then this matter was easy to solve, especially easy to solve. The key to the solution laid with Li Ruobing. Because Li Ruobing was caught in the dead end, she had no choice but to take the initiative to help Wu Chen, and she was willing to help Wu Chen to cover up this matter. Of course she didn't have to help, but that would do too much harm to her. Let's go. Wu Chen took the car keys and turned to Li Ruobing to signal. Li Ruobing was expressionless, walked up to Wu Chen, straightened Wu Chen's collar, then picked up the bag on the sofa. She put her other hand around Wu Chen's arm and said, let's go. The two went to the door to change their shoes. Then, they held hands and went out together like a real couple. Ding-a-ling. The phone rang. This time it's Li Ruobing's. The two stopped at the door, and Li Ruobing answered the phone. Boss, there is a group of people surrounding Mr. Wu's car. I know, get off right away. It was Li Ruobing's bodyguard who called, and Li Ruobing hung up after saying a word. They went downstairs. On the way downstairs, Li Ruobing, who was holding Wu Chen's hand, suddenly said in a low voice, I don't like this feeling. What kind of feeling? Wu Chen replied, it's a feeling, that you're planning everything, and you're planning on me too. Li Ruobing glanced at Wu Chen as he spoke. Don't say it like I'm shrewd. Wu Chen smiled, if you didn't bet with me, I will never get you involved in this matter. Why are you blaming me? I don't blame anyone. I don't like this feeling. Are you begging me not to play against me in the future? You know what? You are so annoying. You sound like a baby. I'll fuck you up. Li Ruobing was so angry again that she didn't speak. Will you still bet with me in the future? Wu Chen asked her again. I'll bet you a big-headed ghost. As if I'll bet with you again in the future like a dog. Li Ruobing replied in a low voice. You are quite self-aware. Wu Chen said again. You. Li Ruobing turned her head and squinted at Wu Chen. Wu Chen suddenly felt pain in his ribs. It was Li Ruobing who pinched him. A woman like Li Ruobing would pinch him. To deal with Wu Chen by pinching like a little girl. She was really pissed off. Why are you acting like a little girl? You pinch someone. You didn't really fall in love with me, right? Wu Chen turned his head and laughed teasingly. With a blank face, Li Ruobing immediately raised her left hand and slapped the back of her right hand. There was a loud slap. After she finished hitting her hand, she said, "Is my hand too cheap?" Wu Chen smiled. What else was there to say? The two walked out of the apartment building arm in arm. The moment he walked out of the unit building, Li Ruobing showed a faint smile on her face. She held Wu Chen's arm and leaned slightly towards Wu Chen, as if she was going out with her boyfriend and was in a super good mood. The two walked towards the entrance of the alley. Before reaching the entrance of the alley, a group of bodyguards in black near the entrance of the alley noticed the two of them. Li Ruobing also noticed her bodyguards, but this time when she came here, only 4 bodyguards followed. The other bodyguards were not hers, but members of the Su family. Some of these bodyguards of the Su family had a photo in their hands. It's him. That's right, it's him. The bodyguards of the Su family held up photos for comparison and confirmed that Wu Chen was the one who abducted the eldest lady, and they all surrounded him one by one. After they found Wu Chen's car here, they called Mrs. Su. Mrs. Su was on the way here and asked them to guard the place. Their task now was to guard the car, but since they saw the real owner, they must not let him go. What are you doing? Stand back. The bodyguards of the Su family wanted to surround them, but several of Li Ruobing's bodyguards immediately ran up, blocking Wu Chen and Li Ruobing, and pointed at the group of people fiercely. One of them took out his mobile phone and naturally called someone. Li Ruobing's bodyguards were originally in the off-road vehicle, waiting for Li Ruobing to come out. They saw that the bodyguards of the Su family came over and surrounded Mr. Wu's car. They didn't know what was going on, so they got out of the car to have a look. They kept staring at the side and called Li Ruobing to report. Both sides received strict training and would not easily conflict until now. Don't make a fuss. Li Ruobing let go of Wu Chen's arm and took 2 steps forward. When passing by her bodyguard, she took her bodyguard's mobile phone, hung up, and returned it to the bodyguard. Looking at the dozen or so members of the Su family, Li Ruobing said coldly, "Are you from the Su family? Do you mean to trouble me, Li Ruobing?" Subscribe to Chinese Novel Audio Wave. Chapter 91. These 2 highly intelligent women. Li Ruobing said her family background when they came up. In fact, even if she didn't say anything, several bodyguards of the Su family knew her. But since she said it, they all knew who she was. The bodyguards looked at each other. They knew that as the bodyguards of the Su family, they could not cause trouble for the Su family. The Su family was not afraid of her, Li Ruobing, but whether they could provoke Li Ruobing was not something they could decide. "Boss Li, we are not looking for trouble with you." A tall, bald middle-aged bodyguard stepped forward and said, neither humble nor overbearing. Wu Chen knew him. His name was Yang Kuo, and he was one of Madame Su's trusted bodyguards. At the same time, he was also the deputy director of the security department of Jinfu Group. The deputy director was only a name. He was mainly in charge of the Su family. He could be said to be one of Mrs. Su's confidants. To put it bluntly, he was Mrs. Su's dog leg. It could be seen that Yang Kuo is the head of the dozen or so bodyguards of the Su family who came here. Then what do you stop me? Li Ruobing looked very angry. She was really not used to this. "Boss Li, you misunderstood. We are not here to find you, but to find him. Young Kuo raised his finger and pointed at Wu Chen, who was standing there with one hand in his pocket. He abducted our oldest lady. I don't know if you know about this matter. Abduction. You're saying my man would abduct other women? Li Ruobing became even more angry. Ah, Boss Li, that's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? What do you mean by abduction? That's right, young Kuo, the bodyguard, was also stumped, because he wasn't one of the two bodyguards who followed Su Qingying at that time. 1. He didn't see the specific situation at that time, and he later heard that it was the oldest lady who ran away with a man. How could the young lady just run away with a man? Therefore, including him, the bodyguards of the Su family believed that it was the man who abducted the oldest lady, and they didn't know how he deceived the oldest lady. As such, he used the word, abduction. Speak, Li Ruobing asked with staring eyes and frowning. She stepped forward as she spoke. Her aura was very scary. Boss Li, we have yet to investigate the specific situation, but I can confirm that it was your boyfriend who took away our oldest lady. So, Boss Li, you can ask for yourself, but he can't leave. The bodyguard Yang Kuo said, looking at Wu Chen with unfriendly eyes. Snapped. Very loud. Li Ruobing went up and slapped him, and then shouted, how dare you say that to my man? Yang Kuo took a step back, dazed and then angry, and almost made a move on Li Ruobing, but he controlled it. Get the hell out of here. Li Ruobing raised her hand to them again. Ruobing, don't be like this. Calm down, it's just some misunderstandings, it won't be. Suddenly someone grabbed Li Ruobing's arm, stepped forward and stood side by side with Li Ruobing. Naturally it was Wu Chen. They say that about you, and you just bear it. Li Ruobing turned to look at Wu Chen. We'll explain to them. Wu Chen persuaded. They came here to arrest people indiscriminately, and I should be the one explaining to them. Forget it, calm down. Look at how angry you are, Wu Chen said, smiling at Li Ruobing. Li Ruobing's expression suddenly eased, and her cold eyes turned dull. She took Wu Chen's arm naturally, turned her head to the side and said, forget it. I'll leave it up to you. The two had never agreed to script. But there was nothing wrong with cooperating with each other. They even confused a group of bodyguards from the Su family on the opposite side. Misunderstood. Misunderstanding. Li Ruobing is not so angry because he is unreasonable, but because he feels misunderstood. Think your boyfriend has been framed. If someone with Li Ruobing's temperament was really misunderstood and became so angry, it would be easy to understand. Just then, Su Qingying in the pharmacy finally couldn't bear it anymore. She had been hiding in the pharmacy, standing by the window to observe the situation outside. At first she thought that Li Ruobing was going to force Wu Chen to leave, so that her bodyguards would also be lured away. But Li Ruobing actually got so angry and even took the initiative to slap others. She was so tense, and it was hard to leave even if she wanted to. Afterwards, although Wu Chen held Li Ruobing back, she didn't hear what Wu Chen said to Li Ruobing clearly. There was still some distance between them, and there were people around. She was afraid that they would really fight. What are you doing? Su Qingying came out of the pharmacy, took off her mask, and asked loudly. Miss, are you okay? Miss. The bodyguards of the Su family suddenly saw Su Qingying, and all ran a few steps towards the door of the pharmacy. Qingying, they came looking for you, and they said it was Wu Chen who abducted you. They want to arrest him by force. Li Ruobing spoke at this time, and Wu Chen also walked a few steps towards the door of the pharmacy, speaking in a tone like she was talking to a friend. She didn't have the anger from before. These words even meant to complain to Su Qingying. Su Qingying was taken aback. Li Ruobing actually called her Qingying, and talked to her in this tone. She understood instantly. Two women with high IQs had never communicated with each other before, but they both had high IQs. What nonsense are you talking about? Su Qingying turned her head and glanced at her bodyguards. She said with distress, when did you have the right to intervene in my affairs? Miss Ruobing invited me out to chat. What? Abducted. Can you think before you speak? You're offending others on behalf of the Su family. The group of bodyguards were again dumbfounded by Su Qingying's words. Su Qingying didn't say too many words, and she wouldn't scold others like Li Ruobing. Su Qingying was usually nice to everyone and never said harsh words to the people around her. Even in order not to make it difficult for the bodyguards around her, she always gave way. Because she had always been like this before, the bodyguards of the Su family also feel the same way about her. So at this moment, even though Su Qingying's tone was not too angry, it still gave them the feeling that Miss is losing her temper. Li Ruobing got angry first. Su Qingying showed up and lost her temper with them. This seemed to be a real misunderstanding. Miss, we're not, Madam asked us to. Young Kuo, the bodyguard, tried to argue. In the Su family, making Su Qingying angry was really a serious matter, because Su Qingying rarely got angry. Once angry, it meant the matter was big. Are you bothered about me and my mother? What she says is what she says. Is what she said must be right. Su Qingying didn't let him finish his sentence. She stepped up. The dozen or so bodyguards of the Su family were all frightened at once, and they didn't even dare to meet Su Qingying's eyes. The more tempered a person was, the scarier she was once angry. As for Su Qingying's current anger, although 7 points were fake, 3 points were true. Because her mother's control over her was so strict that others helped her. It was this group of bodyguards who obeyed her mother's orders and were helping her mother. If it's a big deal, they would report it. Su Qingying let go today, so she continued. At the intersection in the distance, a convoy was rapidly approaching the entrance of the alley. All black Mercedes-Benz, there was about 6 or 7 cars. Wu Chen noticed it first, and turned his head to look. Li Ruobing also noticed it, and following Wu Chen's gaze, everyone else noticed and looked over too. It's the Su family. It's Mrs. Su. She had come. Chapter 92. Madam Su, nice to meet you. Mrs. Su always had a lot of ostentation, and this time was no exception. The moment Su Qingying saw the convoy approach, the angry aura disappeared from her body. Uneasiness replaced it in her eyes, and she subconsciously glanced at Wu Chen. Wu Chen seemed to feel Su Qingying's gaze, turned his head to glance at Su Qingying, blinked, gave Su Qingying a reassuring look, and smiled. Su Qingying was indeed at ease. But as the convoy approached quickly, she was still a little nervous. Her fear of her mother had been cultivated since she was a child. She was like the little elephant in a fairy tale, who was tied by a rope since she was a child. The little elephant grew up day by day and became an adult elephant. Even so, it felt like it couldn't break free. Su Qingying really had a problem in her heart. And this kind of problem was caused by her mother alone. They all saw the Su family's convoy coming, and they could guess who was in the car. The people of the Su family knew it, but Li Ruobing could guess it. Li Ruobing took a deep breath and adjusted her mood. She knew that it was easy to confuse a few bodyguards, but Mrs. Su was a very difficult woman to deal with. And Li Ruobing had to help Wu Chen and Su Qingying completely cover up her true desires. She felt that she was a bit cheap. Not only did she have to cover up this matter, she even had to cover up for Wu Chen and Su Qingying in the future. The two were dating in private, so it was fine if they were not discovered, but if they were discovered, she, Li Ruobing, would have to jump out and help cover it up. However, Li Ruobing had no other way. If she leaked the matter between Wu Chen and Su Qingying, then she would not be able to hide the matter of her and Wu Chen's fake couple. Wu Chen suddenly touched Li Ruobing, tilted his head and whispered something to Li Ruobing, the bag in Su Qingying's hand. Li Ruobing turned to look at Su Qingying, only then did she notice that Su Qingying was holding a small white paper bag. There were also the words, Kingmei Pharmacy, on it. It was the medicine that Su Qingying bought. It might be because she was too nervous or something. Not only did she took the medicine out of the pharmacy, but also didn't put it in the bag. She just kept holding it in her hand, as if she didn't feel it. When a person was too focused on thinking about something, they were likely to subconsciously ignore what they were holding. Although Su Qingying bought special medicines, the pharmacy kindly gave her a confidential bag. But when Mrs. Su came over noticed it, It would be bad. They must not let Madame Su see what medicine was inside. Qingying, give me the medicine, Li Ruobing said to Su Qingying, beckoning and smiling softly. I am really bothering you. I asked you to go and buy medicine for me. Su Qingying was startled and immediately reacted. It's okay. She walked to Li Ruobing in 2 steps, handed the paper bag containing the medicine to Li Ruobing, and said, it's thank you for helping me, so, it's no trouble. She seemed thoughtful. Su Qingying mentioned, helping her. She also mentioned before, how about your mother? Is she all right? However, Li Ruobing heard how powerful Mrs. Su was at home. Su Ruiwen let her do what she wanted, and she was particularly strict with her daughter. As an outsider, of course, Li Ruobing couldn't know how strict Mrs. Su's discipline on Su Qingying was. But now she seemed to understand through Su Qingying's words, and she also understood why Su Qingying said, thank you for helping me. But Wu Chen never mentioned to Li Ruobing how he took Su Qingying away from home. Now, Li Ruobing guessed something by herself. Wu Chen felt that he didn't need to speak in such detail, and he didn't have the time. He felt that, based on the IQ of these 2 women, if they couldn't understand what they would say in harmony, then, one of them is mentally handicapped. The convoy would soon arrive at the entrance of the alley. Wu Chen suddenly took 2 steps to one side, with his hands in his pockets, looking at the car that was about to stop in a natural manner. Because he moved, Su Qingying and Li Ruobing stood closer, while Wu Chen was 1 step away. Li Ruobing glanced at Wu Chen, then handed the medicine bag from her right hand to her left hand, and then hooked Su Qingying's arm with her right hand, directly forming a look of, a close sister. Can you stand it? Li Ruobing tilted her head and whispered something to Su Qingying. The tone of her words did not match the expression on her face. She asked in a cold tone, but there was a smile on her face. I can, Su Qingying replied, but hearing the tone, she felt that she lacked confidence. You think your mother is too controlling and you want to resist her, don't you? Li Ruobing whispered again. She needed to confirm that nothing would go wrong. Yes, Su Qingying replied. That's all right, leave it to me. Don't talk much, Li Ruobing said in an assuring tone. Su Qingying originally didn't like women with too strong a personality, because her mother was like that. She didn't think they looked like women anymore, but at this moment, she suddenly changed her mind. She looked at Li Ruobing slightly differently. She did not bow her head, and she was very tough at this moment, especially able to resist things. The convoy stopped at the entrance of the alley, and a group of bodyguards got out of the car. A bodyguard trotted to the door of the Mercedes-Benz Maybach in the middle, opened the door, raised his hand to block it, and welcomed people to get out of the car. Madame Su got out of the car. She had well-maintained black hair and was nearly 50 years old, but she still looked like she was in her 40s. She wore an old-fashioned but delicate hairstyle. She combed her hair meticulously, wore a dignified black long dress, and wore a shawl, an emerald ring and a dove-egg diamond ring on both hands. There was also a diamond bag in her hand. She was elegant and luxurious. She was very beautiful, even though she was almost 50 years old. The years left marks on her face, making her lose some of her beauty, but she was a little more solemn and elegant, and it could still be seen that she was very beautiful. When she was young, she had to be pretty. Otherwise, it would be impossible to give birth to a fairy-like daughter like Su Qingying. Su Qingying's appearance could be said to have inherited all the advantages of her parents, but not any shortcomings. The mother and daughter really looked alike. When Mrs. Su got out of the car, her expression was cold and a little irritable, but immediately after, she froze for a moment. Because she saw her daughter, arm in arm with the oldest granddaughter of the Li family, seeming to be whispering. And Wu Chen, Li Ruobing's boyfriend, whom she had seen in the photos, was also standing aside. He felt like an outsider, and that he was not close to her daughter. What's the situation? Doubt flashed in Mrs. Su's heart again. She had doubts before, after she knew that it was Li Ruobing's boyfriend who took her daughter away. She knew that many people covet her daughter's appearance and family background, but, Li Ruobing's boyfriend, would he dare to mess around? Wouldn't he be afraid that Li Ruobing would tear him alive? Could there be some misunderstanding? The current scene just confirmed Mrs. Su's previous guess about the misunderstanding. There might really be a misunderstanding. But then a new, bigger problem arose. The bodyguard said in the report that Wu Chen not only hugged Su Qingying, but also spanked Su Qingying's ass, so, she must find out. Qingying. Nonsense. Mrs. Su got out of the car and walked over, took a look at Su Qingying first, and said something sternly. Su Qingying said nothing. Mrs. Su looked at Li Ruobing again. The moment she turned her head, she showed a friendly and natural smile and stretched out her hand. Miss Li, long time no see. Long time no see. Mrs. Su is still so radiant. Li Ruobing shook hands with Mrs. Su smiled politely. Madame Su looked at Wu Chen again. Mr. Wu, right, nice to meet you, she said and even reached out her hand to Wu Chen. Madame Su, nice to meet you. Wu Chen shook hands with Madame Su and smiled. Chapter 93. We are all women, you don't have to lie to me. The word, nice, means, it's a pleasure to meet you. It's a colloquial language used when meeting elders or people of higher status for the first time. It meant to respect each other. Mrs. Su actually said it was a pleasure to meet Wu Chen, which made everyone present have a weird feeling. Not only was it weird, Li Ruobing even sensed a hint of danger in Mrs. Su's tone. Wu Chen ran away with Su Qingying for a day, Madame Su only found Wu Chen now, that was really, very, honored. Mrs. Su was a noble lady who never lost her manners in public. Many of her requirements for her daughter were copied from her own habits, so when she shook hands with Wu Chen, she was really not angry at all. She was still so dignified and elegant. Mr. Wu is indeed as rumored. He is a good-looking talent. Ms. Li, you have a good eye. Mrs. Su actually praised Wu Chen again, and then turned her gaze to Li Ruobing. There was something in the words. Mrs. Su is praising me too much. Li Ruobing replied. Wu Chen kept smiling, too lazy to speak. This is not a place to talk. Mrs. Su looked around, and her eyes wandered back and forth between Wu Chen and Li Ruobing. How about we find a place and have a good talk? What do you think, Miss Li? She finally asked Li Ruobing, because she felt that Li Ruobing was the one in charge. Okay, I also have something to say to Mrs. Su, Li Ruobing smiled lightly. They got in the car and leave. Wu Chen didn't get in the same car with Li Ruobing and went directly to his Lamborghini. Li Ruobing came here today in a Bentley Continental. Wu Chen didn't get in her car, so the co-pilot seat was vacant. Su Qingying, who was going to get in the car with her mother and was ready to face her mother in the car. She saw the situation and went after her mother. Her got into the car first, she closed the door all of a sudden, and then quickly caught up with Li Ruobing. The windows of the Mercedes-Benz Maybach came down immediately. Mrs. Su turned her head and was about to call her daughter. Seeing that her daughter Su Qingying had already boarded the same Bentley as Li Ruobing, she hurriedly closed the door. Her expression changed, but she said nothing. A total of more than 10 cars were on the road together. The Su family's motorcade was in front, Li Ruobing and her bodyguard's car was behind, and Wu Chen was driving a Lamborghini at the back. Wu Chen deliberately didn't get in Li Ruobing's car. He knew that Su Qingying was afraid, so as long as he got out of the way, Su Qingying would definitely go to Li Ruobing. He didn't want any uncontrollable accidents to happen when Su Qingying was in the same car with her mother. Su Qingying's fear of her mother would not be reversed in a short time. It was really possible for her to say the wrong thing under pressure, so it was better to be careful. Inside the Bentley Continental, there were only Li Ruobing and Su Qingying. What's going on with you and Wu Chen? Li Ruobing, who was driving the car, asked suddenly. Su Qingying glanced at Li Ruobing and said, Sister, Can you stop calling me sister? You are older. You are bigger. You are the elder sister. Li Ruobing was a little stressed. She was in Wu Chen's bedroom before. When she was in the house, she was really frightened by Su Qingying's strange behavior. Su Qingying felt something was wrong. Then, Miss Li, can I ask you a question first? Su Qingying asked. What? Li Ruobing replied. Are you in that kind of relationship with Wu Chen? Su Qingying asked. What kind of relationship? Li Ruobing didn't understand and glanced at Su Qingying. She might have misunderstood. She was about to ask something again, but stopped, because she was afraid that if she asked a bad question, she would expose herself instead. After a pause, Su Qingying asked, "Then Miss Li, have you slept with Wu Chen?" The question was super straightforward. No, of course not. Li Ruobing turned her head sharply to look at Su Qingying, then at the front and at the road. Our relationship is fake, didn't he tell you all about it? Su Qingying fully confirmed that Li Ruobing was not a masochist, and she was not in a master-slave relationship with Wu Chen. Then, it's even weirder. Then why did you give him a massage? Su Qingying asked again. Li Ruobing agreed to ask one question, but she already asked three. As this was mentioned, Li Ruobing's expression turned indifferent and serious. What a bother. After that, I have to press Wu Chen 99 times. You can't say it. Seeing that Li Ruobing was silent, Su Qingying asked again. I lost a bet with him. Li Ruobing said directly, with a reasonable explanation, in line with her style of keeping her word. As long as she didn't say what the bet was, it's fine. Of course Li Ruobing would not talk about the bet, especially not with Su Qingying. If Su Qingying were to know that Wu Chen actually made a bet on whether he could win her, it would definitely destroy their relationship. Li Ruobing couldn't do such a lowly thing. In fact, she thought too much, and she would not destroy the relationship between the two of them. Bet. You bet on massages. Su Qingying looked at Li Ruobing with a playful look in her eyes, and her tone of voice was clearly implying that Li Ruobing and Wu Chen did something. Miss Li. Seeing that Li Ruobing didn't speak, Su Qingying said again, do you like Wu Chen? We are both women. You don't have to lie to me. I can feel something. You give Wu Chen a massage, and while you were massaging, we bumped into each other, but you didn't explain. Was it to anger me? Miss Su, don't you have too many questions? Li Ruobing turned her head and said with a serious tone, looked at the road ahead again, and said in a relaxed tone, it's okay. Don't study me, let's talk about your business. You have to figure out your own situation. You don't want to never see Wu Chen again, right? Oh, yes, let's talk about business. Su Qingying immediately said. It's subtle. The two had the meaning of tit for tat again. And both of them actually used their relationship with Wu Chen to stir up each other's emotions. Tell me, what happened to you and Wu Chen? How did he take you away from home? Li Ruobing asked. Actually not, we just met. We met at Tangsha's golf course today. In fact, some of what he said is quite right. My mother, Su Qingying explained the situation. She hid a lot of important situations and details, and blurred out how she met Wu Chen. Because she wanted to hide that she was a masochist. She attributed her running away with Wu Chen entirely to Wu Chen's persuasion to her and her own awakening. Her mother was really too strict with her, and she wanted to resist. After hearing this, Li Ruobing felt something was wrong. It's that simple. Is Su Qingying mentally retarded? Will you be persuaded by a man you haven't known for a long time before you go with him? You also pretended to be his woman. You even washed and cooked for him. Of course Su Qingying was not mentally retarded. There must be something going on inside, which was deliberately concealed by Su Qingying. Li Ruobing didn't ask about this part of the situation, because it's not important at the moment. The important thing is to deal with Mrs. Su. Li Ruobing understood the priorities, so in the following period of time, Li Ruobing asked Su Qingying a lot about her relationship with her mother. 20 minutes later, Jinfu Tea House, private rooms on the top floor. This was the property of the Su family in Donghai. Although the Su family was in the jewelry business, they also have some other businesses in other industries in Donghai. The private room was very large and had many decorations. Not only could they drink tea and talk about things, but they could also take a temporary rest, just like a big hotel suite. There were only 4 people in the room. Mrs. Su, Su Qingying, Li Ruobing, and Wu Chen. Miss Li, I wonder if you can explain to me why you are with my daughter. Don't you think it's rude to let your boyfriend, Mr. Wu, take my daughter away without asking. I wonder if Mr. Wu's behavior violated the law. Maybe I should consult my lawyer. Mrs. Su asked with a teacup elegantly. After asking, she glanced at Wu Chen, attacking directly. This was just the beginning. Wu Chen is the key point. What's more, she hadn't asked tougher questions yet. Chapter 94. No need to thank me. She attacked Li Ruobing for asking Wu Chen to take Su Qingying away. This was Madame Su's guess. She thought there should be no mistake, otherwise there was no way to explain Li Ruobing's current attitude, so she just asked directly. Mrs. Su, first of all, I want to correct your statement. Li Ruobing, who was sitting opposite Mrs. Su, said calmly, first of all, my boyfriend didn't take your daughter away by force. Miss Qingying and I met by appointment. But because I have something to do at the moment, I asked my boyfriend to come find your daughter. Yes, I have an appointment with Miss Ruobing. Su Qingying, who was sitting on the side sofa chair, immediately echoed. Madame Su immediately glanced at her and stared at her. Su Qingying suddenly felt a little languid, looking unnatural, and dared not speak. Oh, is that so? Madame Su looked at Li Ruobing again and said, then why did I hear that it was Mr. Wu who forcibly dragged my daughter away? Madame Su, your daughter is not a doll. If she was really forced, does she not know how to shout? But maybe my daughter was deceived by sweet words. Your daughter is 27 years old, she is not an ignorant little girl. Mrs. Su, do you think it is possible to lie to her? My daughter is too kind. Mrs. Su and Li Ruobing looked at each other. There was no anger in the tone of the two of them talking, but they confronted each other without saying harsh words. Mrs. Su didn't ask Su Qingying what was going on. She didn't even let Su Qingying speak. Because she knew that her daughter had rebelled, and her daughter would not speak for her. She had to blame it on others, otherwise, it would be her daughter Su Qingying's fault. Madame Su, don't you want to know the reason why I asked your daughter to meet? Li Ruobing suddenly changed the subject and asked Madame Su directly. Miss Li, please, I would like to hear more about it. Mrs. Su gestured with the hand holding the teacup, and after speaking, she took a sip gracefully. She looked at Li Ruobing without anger. Li Ruobing paused for a moment before continuing, I have nothing to do with your Su family's affairs. I didn't want to get involved, but Miss Qingying has told me in private more than once, saying that she envies me very much. She wants to be a person like me, a woman who is not inferior to others, who can decide her own life, and who can succeed in career like a man. I have many similarities with Miss Qingying. She is better than me in many aspects, but she does not have her own life. I don't know if you, Mrs. Su, understand what I mean. Li Ruobing sat up straight a lot while speaking. She leaned forward slightly, stared at Mrs. Su and said, Miss Qingying is not a real person at all. She is just a puppet that you carefully dressed, a puppet who can't even decide how many bowls of rice she eats. Madame Su's expression suddenly changed. As soon as she changed her expression, she turned her head to look at Su Qingying. What did my daughter say to Li Ruobing, an outsider? She dared say something. Su Qingying avoided her mother's gaze. Miss Li. Madame Su looked at Li Ruobing again, her face became more serious. Forgive me, but you are an outsider. Don't meddle in my family affairs. Please respect yourself. Madame Su suddenly became tough. As I said, it has nothing to do with me. I didn't want to get involved. Li Ruobing was not afraid of her. But Miss Qingying has told me too many times. She hoped I can help her. Maybe it's because I feel the same way. I had the same experience, and I almost couldn't even decide on my own marriage. So, in fact, when I met Miss Qingying today, I just wanted to enlighten her. Li Ruobing said. After a pause, she frowned again and looked at Mrs. Su and said, Mrs. Su, don't you understand? Really don't understand. Because you control your daughter too strictly, you have to take care of everything. She already has some mental problems. Mrs. Su, you don't want to force your daughter to death, do you? You, Mrs. Su stood up suddenly. Her face was full of annoyance. Her hands were tightly clutching the teacup, her knuckles were turning white, and she stared at Li Ruobing intently. Li Ruobing spoke very seriously. Mrs. Su hated it the most when someone told her what to do when it came to children's education. Li Ruobing was not the first person to say this to her. Su Qingying's father, her husband Su Ruiwen, also persuaded her. The more they did, the more disgusted she became and the more angry she got. If the woman who said this to her now was not Li Ruobing, she might have thrown the teacup. Seeing Mrs. Su standing up, Li Ruobing was very indifferent. She leaned back, picked up her bag, and took out the crumpled white paper bag from the bag. It was the white paper bag from the pharmacy, and the medicine Su Qingying bought was still inside. After Su Qingying gave it to her, she stuffed it in her bag when she found a chance, and it was a little wrinkled because it had been folded. Slap! Li Ruobing threw the white paper bag on the table. Inexplicable actions. Mrs. Su glanced at the white paper bag, then looked at Li Ruobing with fixed eyebrows and said, "What do you mean by this? Does Mrs. Su know what this is?" Li Ruobing motioned, asking and answering, "It's medicine. The medicine I took. The medicine I took recently. I'm not feeling well, so I'm taking medicine, but do you know who bought this medicine?" Mrs. Su stared at Li Ruobing without answering. She knew that Li Ruobing would continue. "Your daughter bought it." "Sure enough," Li Ruobing said, looking at Mrs. Su, "today we were at my boyfriend's house. When I was teaching her, I talked about my own medicine. I planned to ask my bodyguard to buy it and send it to me. When I called, your daughter heard it. Guess how she reacted? She said that she wants to buy it, and she must go buy it for me. She said that in her life, she has never gone to a pharmacy to buy medicine by herself. A pharmacy can be seen everywhere in the street, and the experience of going to buy medicine alone is a novelty to her." Mrs. Su's expression changed. She glanced at her daughter strangely, and then at Li Ruobing. "Guess what else did she do today? She actually cooked for Wu Chen and me. She did all the cooking. She also asked us if the cooking was good, and we said it was delicious. She was very happy at that time, really, very, very happy. She also cleaned the room and washed our clothes. We couldn't stop her, she was just suffocated. Do you understand, Madame Su? It is very clear that no matter what, she ran away from home, she will return home eventually, and she will return to your control. So she seems to want to do what ordinary people can do for today. She wanted to do everything you don't want her to do. Do you know how terrible this kind of retaliatory feedback is? Mrs. Su, ask yourself, do you really not think that you control her too much?" Li Ruobing said these words very seriously, with a very solemn tone, and it could be said that every word hit Madame Su's heart. Mrs. Su didn't even dare to think about that her daughter would do so many things she shouldn't do today, and her expression was gradually changing following Li Ruobing's words. When Li Ruobing finished speaking, her face was no longer annoyed like when she just got up, and her expression was extremely complicated. She looked at her daughter again and found that Su Qingying, who also heard Li Ruobing's words, had red eyes. Although what Li Ruobing said was half true and half false, it also reached Su Qingying's heart. At this moment, Mrs. Su felt a little soft-hearted and guilty, but she immediately suppressed this emotion. So, Mrs. Su sat down and said in a long voice, "I still have to thank you, is that so?" "Miss Li." She calmed down and became elegant again. "No need," Li Ruobing replied. "I still have a question." Mrs. Su answered quickly, looking directly at Wu Chen and said, "Mr. Wu, although I know that you and Ms. Li are kind, so be it. But, I wonder if you can explain to me why you hugged my daughter when you were on the course. You also touched my daughter and spanked my daughter, ass. Can you explain?" After Mrs. Su asked, the atmosphere in the room suddenly changed. Even Li Ruobing's expression was not right. Chapter 95, You are teaching my lady how to play golf. Li Ruobing's expression changed, because she was Wu Chen's girlfriend on the surface. She just stood up and helped Su Qingying to speak out, so when she heard Mrs. Su say that Wu Chen hit Su Qingying's ass on the court, she should change her expression. She should even get angry at Wu Chen directly and question Wu Chen. This was a normal reaction a girlfriend should have. But Li Ruobing's face didn't change because of this. Her relationship with Wu Chen was fake, and she also knew the relationship between Wu Chen and Su Qingying. Her complexion changed, because Su Qingying didn't tell her this. On the way to Jinfu Tea House, Li Ruobing asked Su Qingying a lot in the car, so she was able to say what she said just now, but Su Qingying never mentioned that Wu Chen touched her and even spanked her. It was difficult for Li Ruobing to round up this matter. She even had to get angry with Wu Chen. Wu Chen didn't tell her in advance either. Because this problem, Wu Chen would solve it himself. What's going on? Li Ruobing tilted her body while thinking about it, and asked Wu Chen in a low voice, gritting her teeth, as if his girlfriend was angry. This was what Mrs. Su wanted to see. She was so aggrieved by Li Ruobing just now, but she couldn't explain the truth to Li Ruobing, and she couldn't accept that other outsiders would comment on the Su family's affairs and let other people know about it. So she jumped over all doubts and questioned Wu Chen directly, which also meant to provoke the relationship between Wu Chen and Li Ruobing. Mrs. Su. Wu Chen pressed the back of Li Ruobing's hand, looked at Mrs. Su with a relaxed smile and asked, "You said that I touched Miss Su and spanked her. I don't know who you heard from, can you tell? Do you want to deny it?" Madame Su's eyes sharpened sharply. "Have I ever denied it?" Wu Chen said with a smile. "I just feel that some things may not be true even if they are seen with their own eyes. So, can you tell me, who told you?" "It's Qingying's bodyguard. He saw it with his own eyes. He couldn't have lied to me," Mrs. Su said. She felt that Wu Chen just wanted to deny it. Having said that, Mrs. Su felt that she had already figured out the situation. It's just that her daughter Su Qingying had some personal relationships with Li Ruobing, and she often contacted her in private, and then she always expressed her admiration for Li Ruobing, and she had no conscience to say that she, as a mother, controlled her. Li Ruobing just wanted to help her daughter and made an appointment today, trying to persuade her, enlighten her, and meddle in the affairs of the Su family. Because Li Ruobing had something to do, she asked Wu Chen to pick her up, and this young man named Wu Chen, relying on being Li Ruobing's boyfriend, used her daughter's personal relationship with Li Ruobing to gain her daughter's trust, so he must be talking nonsense to his daughter. She took the opportunity to touch her. He bullied her kind daughter. He must be a shameless scum. It must be so. It's Miss Su's bodyguard. Wu Chen seemed to know his tone and said again, "Is he there? Is he outside? I wonder if we can invite him in, so we can talk about it in person." Dare to confront him. Mrs. Su raised her eyebrows and said, "Yes, I'll ask him to come in." After speaking, she picked up the phone, flipped through it, and dialed a number. "Come in." With just one sentence, she hung up. The person was right outside the door and came in very quickly. The two bodyguards of Su Qingying had been following Mrs. Su since then. When Mrs. Su went to the alley outside Wu Chen's old house, she brought them here. The tall bodyguard who entered the door was the one who called Mrs. Su to report the situation. "Ma'am, you are looking for me." The tall bodyguard entered the door and bowed slightly. Mrs. Su didn't speak and motioned in Wu Chen's direction. The tall bodyguard stood up straight and looked at Wu Chen. "It's you who told Mrs. Su that I touched Miss Su and spanked her, right?" Wu Chen asked directly. "Yes," the tall bodyguard replied with one word, very simply. It's impossible for him to lie. Mrs. Su added at this time. "I didn't say he lied." Wu Chen replied to Mrs. Su, then smiled at the tall bodyguard. "Since you said it, I wonder if I could ask you to tell your madam in more detail." To Miss Su, "What did I do?" The tall bodyguard was taken aback, not understanding what Wu Chen meant. "What else did he do?" Madame Su couldn't help asking. The tall bodyguard looked at Mrs. Su and said, "He." "Please explain in detail," Wu Chen reminded. That is, he hugged the lady from behind, and then played, several times, and let the lady play by herself, and pulled the lady very hard, pulled the lady aside all of a sudden, and then played by herself. Also, he spanked the young lady's bottom, and touched the young lady's shoulder. He also kicked the side of the young lady's feet, to let the young lady's legs be closed. He also held the young lady's waist, and pushed the young lady's back and back of the head. Also, seems to be, correcting Mrs. Figure, standing posture. The tall bodyguard spoke in great detail, and he talked for a few minutes. It's not that his memory was so amazing, but that all of Wu Chen's abnormal actions towards Su Qingying were eye-catching and easy to remember. No one dared to treat Su Qingying like that, only Wu Chen treated Su Qingying like that, which could even be described as rude. As he was talking, the tall bodyguard's tone was not right. He realized it, and felt, he seemed to have, misunderstood something. He called to report earlier. He said Wu Chen spanked Su Qingying's butt. After half an hour, Mrs. Su was on her way to the Tangsha clubhouse, and he didn't report again. Mrs. Su also felt that something was wrong when she listened. She knew that the bodyguard would never lie to her, so she said what she had to say. So, although she suspected that Wu Chen was taking advantage of her daughter, but overall, it didn't seem like he was cuddling and making trouble. "Are you finished?" Wu Chen asked. The tall bodyguard turned to look at Wu Chen. "After finishing, I will trouble you to answer 2 questions for me. The first question, what do you think of my golf skills?" Wu Chen looked at the tall bodyguard and asked. Good. Very good." The tall bodyguard thought for a while, to be able to hit so far, maybe, you're at professional level. Second question. Wu Chen looked at him and asked, "What do you think was I doing with your lady during those half an hour?" "You were teaching my lady how to play golf." The bodyguard said it directly, and then said, "You're quite strict." He himself had already repeated it, so of course, he realized what Wu Chen was doing. Wu Chen was really teaching Su Qingying how to play golf at that time. After the bodyguard finished speaking, Wu Chen turned to look at Mrs. Su. He restrained his smile, and he was very angry when he opened his mouth, in a tone that he had had enough of today. "Mrs. Su, did you hear that? Your bodyguards don't lie, right? Then can you please ask clearly in the future? Then question me. You want me to explain to you? What do you want me to explain to you? I have been busy with Ruobing all day and want to help your daughter." "Who are you questioning? Your daughter plays golf. Don't you know how bad she is? Is there any grudge against the ball? What about baseball? If you don't know how to play, don't play. Don't insult the sport of golf. What's wrong with me spanking her? Always hunching, when would she stand well? If she has anterior pelvic tilt, she should be treated. I didn't kick her, it's considered light. What's that called? Don't you have any points in your mind? I've taught many friends to play in the past few years. It's the first time I've seen someone as stupid as your daughter." "You." Mrs. Su suddenly stood up and said angrily, "You. Show respect to my daughter." Done. Subscribe to Chinese Novel Audio Wave. Chapter 96. I don't know how it developed into this situation. It's done. At the moment Mrs. Su stood up to defend her daughter and scolded Wu Chen angrily, Wu Chen was done. Because once Mrs. Su has such an attitude, it was tantamount to putting Su Qingying on the opposite side of Wu Chen. She was protecting her daughter who was bullied and insulted, so she would never doubt that there was something wrong with Wu Chen and Su Qingying. He insulted Su Qingying in front of her, regardless of Su Qingying's feelings. Even if Su Qingying really had any special feelings for Wu Chen before, it's probably gone now. Everything else was secondary. Among today's matters, everything else was secondary. What happened to Wu Chen spanking Su Qingying's ass? Even if Mrs. Su still thought that Wu Chen was taking advantage of the opportunity, so what? Su Qingying herself didn't say she didn't want to. Even the sufferer didn't protest, so how could Mrs. Su? But it was because Su Qingying was not unwilling, she didn't resist. Su Qingying was very cooperative with Wu Chen at that time. This was the biggest problem. It made Mrs. Ku suspect if Su Qingying had a relationship with Wu Chen. Because the Su family was recruiting a son-in-law. Su Ruiwen's health was not good, and no one knew how long he would last. Su Qingying had to take over, so Su Qingying needed to get married. She needed a stable family and an excellent man who could assist her, and this man must marry into the Su family. This was the key question. In fact, Wu Chen didn't care at all. He offended Mrs. Su on some minor issues, some verbal conflicts. After all, she was only Mrs. Su, not Su Ruiwen. Mrs. Su was Su Ruiwen's virtuous wife. She would not make a big fuss about some small problems, and she will not affect the great interests of the Su family and the Jinfu group. She had a sense of proportion. Only when it came to big issues would she be reckless. Su Qingying was the future of the Su family and the future of Jinfu group. So her relationship problem was the biggest problem. This was also what Su Ruiwen cared about. Whether the Su family's conditions for recruiting a son-in-law were reasonable or unreasonable, the rest were all determined by Mrs. Su, except for the one about marriage, which was determined by Su Ruiwen himself. Su Ruiwen didn't want the family business he had worked so hard for most of his life to easily fall into an outsider's hand. Therefore, although Su Ruiwen had always disagreed with his wife's way of educating his daughter, the husband and wife were in agreement on the current issue of Su Qingying's relationship and marriage. Mrs. Su and Su Ruiwen would never allow any bad boy to hook up with their daughter and have an affair with their daughter. And as long as this problem could be solved, other problems would be small problems. It's a small problem that was not worth the war between the Su family and Li Ruobing. Although Li Ruobing's power alone was far inferior to the Su family's, Li Ruotai, the younger brother behind Li Ruobing who was extremely protective of his elder sister, and the entire Li family behind the two siblings were after all far more powerful than the Su family. This was a bitter pill. But to tell the truth, Wu Chen just satirized her a few words in front of her, and the benefits to Su Qingying were huge. Because of this, Mrs. Su would let go of that suspicion and might even feel sorry for her daughter, thinking that it was because her daughter was so well-bred that she tolerated Wu Chen's teaching method of taking advantage of the opportunity. Mrs. Su undoubtedly loved her daughter Su Qingying very much. It's just that her love for her daughter was a little sick. After Mrs. Su stood up and scolded Wu Chen angrily. "I don't mean to disrespect Ms. Su. I'm just telling the truth, she is really stupid," Wu Chen replied to her, and at the same time, from the angle that Madame Su couldn't see, from behind the table, he lightly stepped on the back of Li Ruobing's feet one time. He didn't know why Li Ruobing didn't cooperate right away. Maybe it was because she hadn't seen him get angry before, so she reacted slowly. Madame Su wanted to say something again. Li Ruobing finally reacted. "Mrs. Su." Li Ruobing stood up suddenly, made a loud voice, which interrupted Mrs. Su's emotions. She said, "My dear, what are you doing? Qingying and I are friends, don't say that she is your friend, not mine." Wu Chen turned his head to look at Li Ruobing, and then entered a state of feeling sorry for Li Ruobing. "Haven't you had enough? Do you think you are kind? You want to help Ms. Su, right? You are afraid that she will be overwhelmed, right? You are afraid that one day she will be too depressed and jump off the building. Then, look, how did the Su family treat you? What is the purpose of the two of us being so busy all day? We were stopped and refused to leave, and they insisted on talking to you, and you still explained to her. You explained to her, did she take your favor? Does she think you are doing a favor for Miss Su?" Everyone sensed why Wu Chen suddenly got angry. That's enough for today. Feeling unworthy for Li Ruobing and feeling unworthy for Li Ruobing. But only Su Qingying and Li Ruobing knew that Wu Chen was acting, and the acting was so real that they almost didn't realize it. While saying this to Li Ruobing, Wu Chen also gave Li Ruobing a wink. "Don't say that, don't be angry. Don't say that. Let me handle this. Calm down first," Li Ruobing said, and patted Wu Chen's chest, really trying to comfort Wu Chen's emotions. Seeing this scene, Madame Su's complexion changed again. She couldn't imagine that a woman like Li Ruobing, who was strong on the outside but also strong on the inside, would do this to a man. She felt that the relationship between her and Wu Chen was not that women were strong and men were weak, but that she cared about Wu Chen's emotions. That's one thing worth mentioning. Just now, Wu Chen asked the bodyguard to explain in detail, and then confronted Mrs. Su's behavior. Whether Mrs. Su thought that Wu Chen took advantage of her daughter by teaching golf was not important. What's more, Li Ruobing stepped up. As Wu Chen's girlfriend, of course she had to care about whether Wu Chen had the idea of taking advantage at that time, but for Wu Chen's explanation, she could choose to believe what Wu Chen said. Whether Mrs. Su believed it or not was her business. For Li Ruobing, she would just believe it. She could just think that her boyfriend is not that kind of person. In this way, she could not get angry, and she had to comfort Wu Chen. Forget it, dear. Just do it for me, okay? Qingying is my friend. Stop arguing, Qingying is still there, Li Ruobing said, suddenly kissing Wu Chen's cheek. In front of Mrs. Su, she kissed Wu Chen in order to appease Wu Chen's emotions. Madame Su was so shocked. Is this still the Li Ruobing I know? Being kissed by Li Ruobing, Wu Chen was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect Li Ruobing to cooperate with him to this extent. All right, I'll do what you say. Wu Chen reluctantly said, leaning back on the sofa, and regaining his calm and indifference. Seeing that Wu Chen promised not to quarrel, Li Ruobing breathed a sigh of relief, stood up suddenly, turned to look at Su Qingying and said formally, Miss Qingying, I'm sorry my boyfriend said that to you. I apologize to you on his behalf. I'm sorry. After she finished speaking, she looked at Mrs. Su, her face suddenly sank, extremely serious. Mrs. Su, we are tired after working with Miss Qingying all day. Do you have any other questions? She also seemed to feel that today was not worth it, and she was blamed for her kindness. This made Mrs. Su feel that she might have offended Li Ruobing. Originally, she was reasonable about this matter. Her daughter was suddenly abducted by Wu Chen. Of course, she had to ask clearly. Only when she reasoned with Li Ruobing could she reason with Li Ruobing. The reason why Mrs. Su could be called a good housewife was naturally because she was helpful to Su Ruiwen in his career. She knew how to advance and retreat, knew who she could offend, as well as who must not be offended when it was not necessary. As such, Madame Su would never offend Li Ruobing easily. If she could make peace, make peace. She didn't know how it developed into this situation. Miss Li, you sit down first, sit down. Rest here when you're tired, don't rush, we'd better make some things clear. Our two families will have to move around frequently in the future. Mrs. Su said emotionally, suddenly slowing down. She raised her hand to signal. Chapter 97. Husband, am I really stupid? Madame Su's tone softened all of a sudden. She didn't know when her daughter Su Qingying had friendship with Li Ruobing, and Li Ruobing was willing to spend a day trying to persuade her because of her. This kind of friendship, if you look at it alone, it was a good thing for the Su family, a very good thing. But now, it seemed that the friendship between her daughter and Li Ruobing couldn't be kept, not to mention that she offended Li Ruobing, the granddaughter of Li family. She couldn't do this. The situation had been investigated, there was really no need to offend her. Miss Li, sit down first. You haven't had tea yet. At least have a cup of tea before leaving. Mrs. Su gestured again, and then she sat down first. Li Ruobing followed and sat down, her face softened a little. Miss Li, I actually know that you are kind, we must have misunderstood. Mrs. Su thought about it again, but about our Su family, I hope you can understand my thoughts. I, as a mother, don't want to harm my daughter. I hope she is good, I hope she can be better. Miss Qingying is not good enough. Li Ruobing asked Madame Su. She is excellent. She is the pride of my husband and I, but you know, if we hadn't guided her correctly, she wouldn't be so excellent. I hope she can continue to be so excellent. She is 27 years old, Li Ruobing said again. Miss Li, she is my daughter. Mrs. Su interrupted Li Ruobing. On the issue of educating Su Qingying, she would never give in. She was very stubborn on this point. This was also one of the reasons why Wu Chen didn't mind offending her. If he couldn't convince her, he would let her bow her head in another way. But today I really have to thank you, Miss Li, Madame Su said again quickly, and then slowed down to normal speed. Maybe, Qingying did have some problems. I didn't realize that. This is my negligence. She cooks, cleans the room, does the laundry, and even buys medicine, all of which I did not expect. As Mrs. Su said that, she glanced at Su Qingying. Su Qingying just sat there in a very depressed mood and said nothing. Mrs. Su certainly didn't want her daughter to have problems. If there was a psychological problem, she would be ruined. Of course, what Mrs. Su was saying now might not be what she thought. She was just trying to reconcile the relationship with Li Ruobing. Looking at her daughter, after a pause, Mrs. Su looked at Li Ruobing again. I will think about it. I will allow Qingying to do some things. After all, she has also reached the age of marriage. Such things as washing and cooking, the family has servant is it, but if she wants to understand it herself and she wants to do it herself, then I will not stop her from now on. Oh, by the way, Miss Li, you are also 27 years old this year, right? Mrs. Su suddenly shifted topic. She didn't want to talk to Li Ruobing about her daughter's education anymore. Well, yes, 27. Li Ruobing nodded. Qingying is the same age as you. No wonder you can become friends. Mrs. Su smiled as she spoke and asked, isn't Qingying older? Yes, Miss Qingying is 3 months older than me. Speaking of which, I still have to call her sister Qingying, Li Ruobing said. Sister or not, our Su family is incomparable to your Li family. Those from small families are all of the same age, so just call them by name. Mrs. Su praised the Li family, with a trace of sympathy on her face. She never heard Li Ruobing call anyone with another surname, sister. Li Ruobing's words, Sister Qingying, made Mrs. Su realize that the relationship between Li Ruobing and her daughter was really good. If she could develop further and develop into a relationship like best friends, then her daughter might have all the conditions to take over immediately. This would become the strongest connection for her daughter Su Qingying. The few restless shareholders in the group who questioned their daughter's age and were waiting for the death of her husband Su Ruiwen might just stop immediately. Su Qingying and Li Ruobing referred to each other as sisters. Although the relationship between Li Ruobing and his family was not very good, everyone in Donghai knew how deep the relationship between Li Ruobing and Li Ruotai was. As long as Li Ruobing was willing to help her daughter, then Li Ruotai would definitely help her elder sister. As the eldest grandson of Li family, Li Ruotai could use all the energy of the Li family. In other words, as long as her daughter Su Qingying got along well with Li Ruobing, she would be able to borrow all the energy of the Li family at critical moments in the future. This was very scary. Not only would it allow her daughter Su Qingying to secure her position immediately after taking over and suppress all the old foxes in the group, it would also greatly benefit the development and growth of Jinfu Group. Everyone knew that Li Ruobing was a person who didn't like to socialize in private and had little contact with others. She was a friend in the business field, but she was a loner in private. Mrs. Su couldn't figure out why her daughter and Li Ruobing had such a relationship. It did not matter. The important thing was not to turn against each other, and it was better to further deepen the relationship. Thinking of this, Mrs. Su's face became more joyful. Miss Li and my Qingying have such a good relationship, there must be a lot of common language. In fact, you have quite a lot in common. You have to run a business, and you have to do it well. Madame Su continued, speaking of it, Qingying has very few friends. Maybe it's because I'm too strict. She doesn't have any close friends. It's her luck to be able to make friends with Ms. Li. Don't say that, there is no such thing as luck. Yes. Miss Qingying is so outstanding, everyone obviously likes her, Li Ruobing said. The smell of gunpowder was gone. Since Mrs. Su didn't want to offend Li Ruobing because of this kind of thing and planned to make amends, the atmosphere became better and better under her control. She also let her see her other side, a sociable side. There were too many wealthy wives in Donghai, and now most of them had become yellow-faced women in the family. Faced with the fact that their husbands have other women, they could only choose to be patient. Mrs. Su was really different. Her status today did not depend entirely on her husband. She was not called a good wife for nothing. For the next 10 minutes, the rhythm of the conversation was under the control of Mrs. Su, and she said some things that had nothing to do with the things at hand. She diverted the conversation into chatting and getting closer. Li Ruobing saw that the matter was settled and was too lazy to bother, so she followed Mrs. Su's words. She made the atmosphere particularly harmonious. One thing worth mentioning was that Mrs. Su only talked to Li Ruobing and never said anything to Wu Chen. She held a grudge, and she already had a great prejudice against Wu Chen. But since her daughter didn't pursue it and because of Li Ruobing, at this point, she could just forget about him. She kept her prejudices to herself. In fact, there was another very important reason why she suddenly wanted to redeem herself. She was worried that if they left like this, Wu Chen would go back and tell Li Ruobing what to say. She wanted to block this possibility. It's getting late, Ms. Li. I see that you are really tired. Why don't you rest here? The conversation was almost over. Madame Su glanced at her watch and stood up. Before Li Ruobing could answer, she immediately said to Su Qingying, "Qingying, since maybe your mother was too strict with you before. I know you are under a lot of pressure, so don't go back today, just come to the company tomorrow morning." After she finished speaking, she looked at Li Ruobing and said, "Miss Li, I'll let Qingying stay with you. It's rare for Qingying to relax, so I'll trouble you again to enlighten her." Wanting Li Ruobing to enlighten her daughter was false. In fact, she only wanted them to deepen their relationship. After all, her daughter would still go home. In addition, Mrs. Su was also guarding against Wu Chen. With Li Ruobing around, Wu Chen definitely wouldn't dare to make trouble, but with Su Qingying around, Wu Chen wouldn't be able to gossip about her. Then, okay. Li Ruobing stood up. The two said a few more words, shook hands, and Madame Su led them away. Before going out, Mrs. Su seemed to glance at Wu Chen unintentionally, with a very unfriendly look in her eyes. Wu Chen ignored her indifferently. He even wanted to laugh a little. He guessed what Madame Su was thinking. And he would soon let Mrs. Su understand that he was not just trying to tell the story. He would also let Mrs. Su understand that when Su Ruiwen was to retire, in the Su family, would she, Mrs. Su, have the one who has the final say. Now, it was her daughter Su Qingying, the successor, who would have the final say. Not only in the Su family, but also in the Jinfu group. Wu Chen would soon let everyone understand who has the final say. Madame Su left, and there were only 3 people left in the room on the top floor of the tea house. Su Qingying sent her mother out, and after making sure that her mother had gone far away, she closed the door, then quickly walked to the edge of the sofa, pulled Wu Chen's clothes and asked unhappily, "Honey, am I really stupid?" Chapter 98. Wu Chen. What are you doing? Don't mess around. Su Qingying came here to act like a baby. Of course she knew that Wu Chen was acting when he got angry before, but Su Qingying really couldn't play golf. When Wu Chen said she was stupid, she wondered if he really spoke her mind. Snapped. With a crisp sound, it was Wu Chen who patted her back. "Are you a fool? Would I really say that about you?" Wu Chen raised his head and smiled. He raised his hand as a signal after speaking. Su Qingying turned around directly, sat in Wu Chen's arms, put her arms around Wu Chen's neck and said, "The things my husband said about me are all fake, right?" She was just acting like a baby. She was not mentally handicapped. "Of course it's all fake," Wu Chen said, then raised his hand and flicked Su Qingying's forehead. Su Qingying smiled, and kissed Wu Chen on the face. "I say, you two, can you not do this?" A faint voice came suddenly. It was Li Ruobing. She came from the entrance of the private room. She and Su Qingying saw off Mrs. Su, and only Wu Chen sat on the sofa. When Li Ruobing came back, she saw Su Qingying sitting in Wu Chen's arms, kissing Wu Chen. "It's really, my brain hurts." Li Ruobing raised her hand to cover her forehead, turned her lower body to look to one side, and then turned back. Her face was still calm, but she was already cursing in her heart. She was scolding herself. What was she trying to do by cooperating with Wu Chen so much? Seeing Li Ruobing's attitude, Su Qingying stood up from Wu Chen's arms, looked at Li Ruobing and said, "Miss Li, thank you today. I have troubled you about my husband and me." Li Ruobing raised her hand. She was too lazy to say anything and didn't want to talk about this matter anymore. She went inside and sat down, which was the sofa chair that Su Qingying was sitting on before. Not even a minute after Mrs. Su left, Li Ruobing and Su Qingying changed seats. Su Qingying came to Wu Chen's side, while Li Ruobing sat a little further away. Should we change the place? Su Qingying took the initiative again. This is my family's property, and these are all from our Su family. Miss Li, let's leave. Su Qingying wanted to leave, because she was uncomfortable. Jinfu Tea House belonged to her family. She used to come here often to talk with clients. And it's hard to talk here. Su Qingying didn't dare to speak too loudly, for fear of being heard by people passing by the door. Let's go to my company, my office. I think I really need to have a good talk with you. Li Ruobing said seriously at the end, looking at Su Qingying, and then at Wu Chen. She was really thinking of having to cover for the two of them dating in the future. She had a headache and a feeling of heartache. Okay, are you leaving, husband? Su Qingying agreed, then turned around and asked Wu Chen. Don't worry, what will you be talking about? Let's talk about it later. It just so happens that there is still some time today. When Su Qingying turned around to ask questions, Wu Chen had already taken out his mobile phone. Su Qingying tilted her head to look at what was said on the phone screen, and saw that Wu Chen was looking at the dial page of the phone. He appeared to be looking at who he would be calling. Honey, can't you remember the other party's number? Su Qingying asked. No, Wu Chen replied, raised his head and smiled at Su Qingying and said again, I was thinking, who should I call first? Who should you call first? How many people should you call? Su Qingying frowned slightly. Li Ruobing on the sofa listened, as if thinking of something. His expression changed suddenly, and he got up. Wu Chen, what are you doing? Don't mess around, Li Ruobing said. Just now Wu Chen said, I still have some time today, or something, and he wanted to call someone again. Based on Li Ruobing's current understanding of Wu Chen, she immediately thought that Wu Chen was going to make trouble. Su Qingying already followed him, and she was still a little bit determined. So he definitely wasn't messing with Su Qingying. But if it's related to Su Qingying, then it could only be the Su family. Did I say I was going to mess around? Wu Chen turned his head to look at Li Ruobing and said with a smile. Don't play anymore, okay? Li Ruobing took a few steps forward. It's all right now. The matter has been settled. You don't need to take the initiative to provoke disputes. Mrs. Su can't do that either. What else do you want to pursue? You can also meet Miss Su in the future. What else do you want? I am not thinking about that. Wu Chen kept smiling. Don't worry, I won't get you involved this time. It's not about me. Li Ruobing took a few steps forward. Isn't today dangerous enough? It took a lot of hard work to get back. It's all fine now. Don't. Was today dangerous? Wu Chen interrupted Li Ruobing, and looked at her with a smile. The two looked at each other, and there was a second of silence. Su Qingying was dumbfounded, because she didn't know why the two quarreled, and it was very sudden. If she wasn't Qingying's mother, I wouldn't choose such a gentle way to solve this problem today. Wu Chen looked at the phone again, speaking quickly but naturally, pressing numbers one by one while talking. Remember what I said. Everyone has secrets, everyone has them. Not to mention a company of the size of Jinfu Group, the bigger the company, the bigger the problem. If I change the way, then Mrs. Su would have knelt in front of me just now, begging me to let her daughter go. Let her go. Li Ruobing heard what Wu Chen said, and she didn't dare to think at all whether what Wu Chen said was true or empty brags. But she is Qingying's mother after all. Wu Chen finished entering the 11-digit number, did not dial, and turned to look at Li Ruobing. She is not a bad person, but her love for Qingying is a little sick. She wants her daughter to follow her plans to live in a good way, because she thinks that is the best. She can work hard for her daughter, and she can bow to anyone for her daughter, such as she did to you just now. Wu Chen sighed and smiled for a moment. Glancing at Su Qingying, Wu Chen said to Li Ruobing again, Qingying is my woman now. I dare not say what a good man I am, but since she followed me, I don't need to embarrass her if I have another way. I will not wrong myself, nor will I wrong her. I don't need to force her to make a choice between love and family. If I do that, even if she chooses me, she will not be happy in the future. Li Ruobing listened. After Wu Chen finished speaking, her first feeling was envy. She didn't know why she felt this way. She just felt that Wu Chen doted on Su Qingying very much. An unpredictable and powerful man, a man who would not let his woman feel wronged. Could it be that Wu Chen liked women who were particularly obedient? Obedient pet. Li Ruobing shook her head suddenly. She was frightened for a moment just now. What kind of thought did she come up with? So, Li Ruobing asked Wu Chen seriously, what are you going to do now? You've guessed it. Wu Chen smiled. You? Li Ruobing's eyes widened. As expected, Wu Chen still wanted to move against the Su family. It's crazy. The Su family was a dominant existence in the East China Sea. Jinfu Group was among the top 3 jewelry company in the country. It was the leading enterprise in the East China Sea. There was no conventional company of this size, even under the Li family. Although it was mainly because of slow money, slow development, and effort, the size of the Jinfu Group was indeed too large. The Li family also had a few private equity funds that surpassed Jinfu Group in size. Wu Chen actually wanted to disturb the Su family in the East China Sea. Even if the Li family wanted to move the Su family, it would be impossible to attack the Su family's stronghold, Donghai. Instead, they would attack from other aspects of the country. In the East China Sea, the Su family was too difficult to move. You can't do this. If you do this, you will. Li Ruobing quickly approached Wu Chen while talking. When did you start caring about me so much? Wu Chen asked with a smile. Li Ruobing stopped suddenly. Calm down. I'm so angry. How about this? Wu Chen suddenly picked up the phone and shook it. I haven't made the call yet. How about we hand over the choice to Qingying? Wu Chen said, looking at Su Qingying. Chapter 99. The second option. Su Qingying almost listened to the conversation between Wu Chen and Li Ruobing in a daze. It wasn't that she couldn't understand everything. For example, Wu Chen said, kneel down, and, don't make things difficult for her. Although she didn't know what was it, she still understood the literal meaning. And the main reason why she was confused the whole time was because she didn't know why Wu Chen and Li Ruobing were arguing. What did they say at the beginning? It seemed that Wu Chen was going to cause some trouble, but Li Ruobing was trying to persuade him to not do it, saying that he was acting recklessly. Qingying, Wu Chen looked at Su Qingying and spoke. Husband, what were you saying, my mother? Su Qingying asked Wu Chen. It's not important. Wu Chen smiled and motioned to Su Qingying. Qingying, sit across from me. I have a multiple choice question for you. Su Qingying frowned slightly, very puzzled. She walked to the opposite side and sat down across the table with Wu Chen. Li Ruobing stood on the side of the table, crossing her arms, watching with a blank expression on his face. Come on, answer me first. Wu Chen looked at Su Qingying and said, when you go back tomorrow morning, how are you going to face your mother's accusation of running away from home? She will still blame you, right? Su Qingying paused as soon as she opened her mouth, and a feeling of embarrassment and tension appeared on her delicate cheeks. This was a subconscious emotion. Her fear of her mother was fused into her bones. I want it. I want to resist her, and I'll reason with her. What she's doing is not right. I want to explain all her mistakes over the years one by one. After Wu Chen's enlightenment, Su Qingying was indeed stronger than before. She became a lot bolder, but it was only limited to the idea of daring to resist her mother. An idea was useless, and she had no power to actually fight back. It was estimated that after she went back, Madame Su would reprimand her a few times, and she would definitely faint. In fact, Su Qingying's biggest problem was lack of self-confidence. Once the anger was over, it would be over. If she had self-confidence and refused to listen, Mrs. Su might not be able to do much with her. After all, she was the only heir of the Su family. Do you think you can reason with your mother when you are at home? Wu Chen asked back. Su Qingying stopped talking for a while. How could there be any reason? This problem was not limited to the Su family, too many families were like this. They didn't even try to reason with their parents at home. No way. Wu Chen asked again. Su Qingying still didn't speak. Her expression dropped a lot. In fact, She knew very well that she could do whatever she wanted, but in the end, she was afraid that she would fail in her resistance. I have two options here now. Decide whether you want to make this call or not. Wu Chen picked up the phone again and gestured. The dial page was displayed on the screen, and the 11-digit phone number was entered. It was almost time to make a call. The first option: I don't make this call. Nothing happens. You go back on time tomorrow, and then, you will return to your previous life. We can only meet in private in the future. As your father's health is getting worse, her will definitely give you a blind date again and recruit a son-in-law. You refuse, but they will keep forcing you. If there is any qualified man who is willing to accept your family's conditions and decides to marry into your family, I will make him disappear, but, you have to face persecution at home all the time. This situation would not end even after your father dies, because although your father is not in good health, your mother is in good health and very healthy. She is at home, and she is still the Empress Dowager. Even when you are 50 years old, when you reach the age of knowing your destiny, you will probably still live in the shadow of your 70-something mother. Su Qingying's face changed as Wu Chen said that. She just felt that the future became difficult. Li Ruobing listened, knowing that Wu Chen wasn't trying to scare Su Qingying. It really would be like this. But that's not the point. The point was the option 2 that Wu Chen was going to talk about. What exactly was Wu Chen going to do? The second option: I'll make this call. Wu Chen paused, staring at Su Qingying seriously. I will contact other people, and I will let you take over the Su family in the shortest possible time. Great power. You will become the president of Jinfu. I will let you not only have the final say in the company, but also have the final say at home. I will let your mother bow to you, no longer control you, and even start to be a little afraid of you. She will understand that she can no longer control you, who is already strong. She can only accept her fate. And your father, he should be more pleased and proud of you. Wu Chen leaned back after speaking, shook his phone again and said, choose Qingying. Su Qingying was stunned. Li Ruobing was also in a daze. Because both of them felt that the second option Wu Chen mentioned seemed to be talking about a fairy tale. Su Qingying, please choose. Your fate is in your own hands, Wu Chen said again, and then smiled. Su Qingying still didn't come back to her senses. She moved her hand a little, then raised it, hesitated, and made a yeah gesture, but in fact it was 2. The second. Is that okay? Su Qingying chose it, and asked Wu Chen if it was okay. For one reason, the second option was too difficult. Choosing it was like cheating. Of course. Wu Chen smiled, then dialed. He put the phone to his ear. Before Li Ruobing could say anything, Wu Chen had already made a call. She opened her mouth and did not make a sound, then took 2 steps and sat down next to Wu Chen, tilting her head and ears to eavesdrop. In fact, she wasn't eavesdropping, she was listening openly. Wu Chen ignored her. If she could hear something, she would be damned. Perhaps because of Li Ruobing's attitude, Su Qingying also stood up, walked quickly to Wu Chen's side, sat directly in Wu Chen's arms, hugged Wu Chen's neck, shrunk back, and moved to Wu Chen's phone from another angle. She was also listening. These 2 women are really. How about I turn on the speakerphone? Aren't you too tired? Wu Chen said. At this moment, the phone beeped twice and the other person answered it. Wu Chen didn't have time to turn on the speakerphone, so he spoke directly. Hello, who is this? The person on the other side asked directly after connecting with a thick male voice. Are you still having nightmares recently? Have you ever dreamed about Liang Yuan from Nanhe Warehouse? Wu Chen said lightly. Suddenly there was no sound from the other end of the phone, not even the sound of human breathing. Immediately afterwards, there were some small noises. It seemed that the person holding the mobile phone was walking fast, and there was the sound of the mobile phone rubbing against the clothes, a feeling of hiding the mobile phone and walking quickly. For a full 10 seconds, it was quiet again. It was very quiet. There was not even a small sound in the background, which only happened in a closed space, such as hiding in an empty room. You, who are you? The man's voice appeared again, a voice that was lowered, with a little nervousness. Bai Kaifeng asked me to call you. I heard that you have made a lot of money in the past few years, right? Wu Chen said lightly again. You, who the hell are you? The other side was anxious. At this time, Wu Chen raised his left hand and glanced at the time on his watch. It was almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon. 1 hour later, Qingyuan Tea House will be, high mountains and flowing water. Wu Chen hung up after finishing speaking. During the phone call, the two of them spoke a total of 6 sentences. Chapter 100. To usurp her father's power. Li Ruobing sat up straight, looking at Wu Chen with no expression on his face. Su Qingying also sat up straight in Wu Chen's arms. Wu Chen raised his hand and patted her on the back, and she stood up. She also looked at Wu Chen with an expressionless face. Both of them heard the content of Wu Chen's call, knew what Wu Chen said, and also knew what the other party said. This was the end. Just 6 sentences in total. Of course, they didn't understand what the conversation between Wu Chen and that person meant and what the situation was. The option 2 mentioned by Wu Chen before was to make Su Qingying the one who had the final say. Then, he just made such a phone call. Just say a few words. At present, what Li Ruobing could think of was that Wu Chen helped Su Qingying, let her have the final say in the company and at home, take over the power of the Su family in advance, and become the president of Jinfu Group. The entry point should be in Jinfu Group. He was likely to help Su Qingying seize power directly. As long as Su Qingying could succeed in seizing power within the Jinfu Group, instead of waiting for succession, she would take the initiative to seize power to succeed, then the concept would be completely different. In the process of seizing power, she would suppress the family. If she succeeded in seizing power, it meant that the Su family had lost control over her. Then her right to speak at home would be completely different. This was the most straightforward and simple way, but it was also the most difficult. So the person Wu Chen called, Li Ruobing could feel it, and she could guess that Wu Chen might have something to do with the other party. He made an appointment for the meeting time and place. The other party should come to see him, but, who was it? Was Wu Chen trying to threaten the other party? Even if Wu Chen succeeded, what power did the other party have to allow Su Qingying to directly control the company? People who really had that kind of power could be controlled with a few words, and it was extremely complicated for Su Qingying to control the company in advance. It involved all aspects. The most important thing was that the major shareholder of the company was Su Qingying's father Su Ruiwen. It's not that Su Qingying didn't have shares, Su Ruiwen had already given her a part, so that she could enter the company's decision-making level. But after giving Su Qingying a part of the shares, Su Ruiwen was still the largest shareholder of Jinfu Group. The largest share of equity was always in the hands of Su Ruiwen. In this case, to usurp her father's right. How to usurp? What are you thinking about? Can't you figure it out? Seeing that the two women were thinking about something, Wu Chen pulled Su Qingying's hand and squeezed it, but asked Li Ruobing with a smile. You want to start from within Jinfu? Li Ruobing asked with a frown. Wu Chen nodded without listening to Li Ruobing. He already knew what Li Ruobing was thinking. With Li Ruobing's wisdom, it was not surprising to think of it at first, but after that, she would never think of it. Because she didn't understand the situation. She didn't know what the relationship between husband and wife, father and daughter, and mother and daughter of Su Ruiwen, Mrs. Su, and Su Qingying was like. She also didn't know what's going on inside the Jinfu Group. Because she didn't know, she didn't even have the thinking space to continue deducing. And Wu Chen, who stopped on the same day and experienced 1,000 years of reincarnation, the greatest wealth he accumulated was not only those skills and intelligence secrets, but also a very important one, he knew people's hearts. There was a saying that goes, those who know too many secrets will not live long. But, if the person who knew the secret also knew the heart, not only could he live a long and happy life, but he could also control everything. In fact, this matter was not as difficult as Li Ruobing imagined. For Wu Chen, it was not difficult, but for others, it was simply impossible. Only Wu Chen could do it. Let's go. Wu Chen stood up. Wu Chen, I think you should think more about it, Li Ruobing said suddenly. No matter how she thought about it, She felt something was wrong, and without talking about other things, she said that Wu Chen seemed to be threatening someone, and that would really cause problems. Bet. Wu Chen turned his head and asked Li Ruobing. No gambling. Li Ruobing replied very simply. She really had a long memory. Wu Chen also knew that she had a long memory, so after winning the 2 bets against Li Ruobing, he asked to make bets after that to tease Li Ruobing. Honey, do you want to go to Qingyuan tea house? Su Qingying asked Wu Chen. No, go to Ruobing's company first, Wu Chen said. It's too late, isn't it? Su Qingying looked at her watch. Normally, it takes half an hour from here to Qingyuan tea house in Zhangcheng district, but now it's evening rush hour, it might be best to go directly. What's the hurry? It doesn't matter if we are late. Let him wait first. Wu Chen smiled indifferently after speaking. Wu Chen made a signal, then walked out. Su Qingying followed, but Li Ruobing did not move. Wu Chen turned around and looked at Li Ruobing. One thing worth mentioning was that if they wanted to leave Jinfu Tea House, it must be Li Ruobing who took Su Qingying out, not Wu Chen. It was agreed that Su Qingying would accompany Li Ruobing, and Li Ruobing still needed to enlighten her. If Wu Chen took her out, the nature would have changed. Li Ruobing didn't move, obviously she didn't want to cooperate with Wu Chen. Aren't you leaving? Wu Chen asked Li Ruobing with a smile. Li Ruobing didn't speak. Are you sure? Wu Chen asked again, and then said, then let's go. After speaking, he smiled again. Don't, Li Ruobing said immediately. How dare Wu Chen take Su Qingying away? If he did, then it was estimated that as soon as the 2 of them go out, someone from Jinfu Tea House would inform Mrs. Su, and Mrs. Su might call her immediately. She would call her to ask about it. At that time, she wouldn't be able to explain at all, and many things would be overwhelming. Ever since she bet with Wu Chen and was involved in this matter, she was doomed to cover the 2 of them, and she couldn't get away without saying anything, and she couldn't even say a word about Wu Chen. I'm tired. How about this? I can cooperate with you and take Miss Su out, but you have to promise me that I will go to Qingyuan Tea House with you later. I want to see what you are doing. After finishing speaking, Li Ruobing raised an eyebrow at Wu Chen. She really didn't want to bow my head. Her tough temper made her think that if she cooperated directly at this time, she would be too weak. So she obviously had to cooperate with Wu Chen, but she still had to negotiate terms with Wu Chen, so that she wouldn't be considered a loser, which meant trying to save face. Fine, if you want to watch, I don't care. Wu Chen smiled, and there was a trace of weirdness in his smile, but don't regret it. I hope you don't say later that I was the one who got you involved in this matter. You came here on your own initiative. Li Ruobing's expression changed. I feel, I am still in Wu Chen's calculations, even if I want to take the initiative to follow, it is Wu Chen's calculations. Li Ruobing regretted it a bit, but she didn't intend to regret it, because she really wanted to know how Wu Chen would deal with such a big matter. He's going to Qingyuan Tea House, who is he going to see? Set off. The 3 went downstairs, and Li Ruobing drove Su Qingying with her in a Bentley. Wu Chen drove a Lamborghini by himself. The bodyguard drove behind them. They went to Symphony Company first. On the way to the Symphony Company by car, neither Li Ruobing nor Su Qingying knew that Wu Chen, who was driving alone, had called several people respectively, and the call time was very short, and they all finished talking in a few sentences. After arriving at the Symphony Company, they took a break. The 3 of them changed cars and set off again. They got rid of the people from Su family who were secretly following them. When the 3 of them arrived at Qingyuan Tea House, it was almost 7 o'clock in the evening. If the other party arrived on time, he should have been waiting for Wu Chen for nearly an hour. Why are there so many cars? Before entering the door of the tea house, Li Ruobing already felt that something was wrong, because there were so many luxury cars parked outside the tea house at this hour. Wu Chen smiled and didn't say anything. Of course many, because he called more than one person. He entered the door and went upstairs. Thank you for watching. Continue exploring the fascinating world of Chinese novels with us. Hit that subscribe button on Chinese Novel Audio Wave to stay updated with our latest stories. And never miss out on a great listen.